Grab your beverages and turn up your interweb. Solving the world's problems 12 ounces at a time. It's Dudes and Beer.
Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the Dudes and Beer podcast. I am Chris Jordan, your host. With me, as always, is the stalwart and awesome Stephen Bishop.
What's up, guys?
Also with us tonight is our great and good friend, local artist, Christopher J. Oglesby. How you been doing, my friend?
Pleased to be here. Just finished up my fall art festival session.
Yeah.
This is my first
Congratulations.
Relaxation day after that. So.
Good. Yeah, you have been crazy busy with all of the art circuit that goes on in town, all of the art festivals, things like that, all over the place. So I was glad to see you out and about plying your trade, doing what you do, and doing what you're passionate about.
Yeah, and I was lucky enough to be in Houston this last weekend, and we're downtown Houston when the parade was going on.
No, exactly.
Yeah,
you were there for
post.
the Bayou City Art Festival, man. That's a huge one. That's a huge art festival. And I remember when it used to be the Montrose Art Festival.
Right.
Whenever it was out on the street.
Did you have lots of fun?
Well, the parade was a huge thing.
Oh,
it
yeah?
was crazy. Yeah, it was great. It was my first time to ever show in Houston. So
Good. Did you have a good reception?
Experience. Very good, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that is a happening scene there. It
Very,
really is.
sophisticated clientele. And lots of different types of folks. And
Yeah.
Yeah. And one thing that I learned over the last few weeks, I guess I've done 3 shows in the last 4 weeks, is children really seem to like my stuff. Like I've had a number of about 10-year-old kids come up and just point and go, "Look, Daddy," or say, "Your art is very good." And so I think, I don't know what that means, but
That's
apparently
great.
it appeals to kids.
Well, and
That's a plus. Yeah.
I am of the mind, my definition of art, and I had to come to this pretty early as a musician, was anything that moves you.
Yeah.
Because my music is very different than most other people's music. And I remember my dad at one point tuning into one of my Sunday night shows, and I came the next week to help him build a deck on a house he was renting out or something. And him and his buddy were like, "Yeah, we listened to your show last Sunday. That was something."
That was something.
Like, why don't you write some music with
They couldn't find another word.
Why don't you write some music with a beat or some words or something in it?
Oh, God.
A little catchy tune that people will listen to. And I was like, if I write music to appease people like you all the time, I probably wouldn't write music.
That didn't sound like Johnny Cash.
To me, the concept of art is it moved you. It moved you to something to begin with, whether it was being uncomfortable when you listened to it, what have you. So my job as an artist is done.
Do you particularly enjoy making stuff that you think might make other people uncomfortable?
Yes.
Yes,
I do.
So that's a reason why you
Yes,
like
I do. And I use a lot of brainwave frequencies, odd stuff. Like that's one reason why my buddy wanted me to try to soundtrack the horror movie that he made, because he was like, your stuff just fits that genre, like sci-fi and horror.
That's cool.
where it's dissonant chords, more playing with sound and sonics than melody and harmony.
Diminished
That kind of
minors.
stuff. Just really odd sounds, like natural sounds that are used and warped. And I use my recording as a palette, so to speak. And, I was taught to arrange and compose in a graphic form
It's like colors,
rather than a musical notation form.
I've had a piece of art on the easel, and I don't have to spend the whole time talking about it.
No, we'll get
But I
into
currently
topic
have
in a
had
minute.
something on my easel for a while, just because I've had a lot of festivals and haven't had time to mess with it. It was an abstract piece. Ordinarily, I do something that looks, it's an image that I've seen, like somebody I know or a famous celebrity or something.
Sure.
And I've only done a few abstract things, and they usually were things that I kind of had a dream about and woke up in the middle, and thought, I should paint this for some reason. And I'm currently painting, just basically trying to fine tune it. The idea is, are you familiar with the Southwestern, God's Eyes?
Yeah,
They used to make them when
Oh,
we
no,
were
the
kids.
Ojo de Dios. I saw that on Facebook.
The Ojo de,
Absolutely,
so
man.
I'm just trying to clean that up. And so where it's
That's
basically...
a beautiful beautiful one
two
that you
sticks
made.
that make a cross, and then you get some yarn and you tie them around in patterns, and you can use different colors. And so here's my idea. I for some reason woke up in the middle of the night was thinking, well, it's possible to color code musical notes.
Absolutely.
And there's a fairly universal color coding of it.
Sure.
And so I thought I was going to take something that had a pretty simple 4/4 beat and make a God's eye. And so, like when something was a half note, that section would be half
quarter the size of
the whole note. And I would use like blacks for pauses and grays there were like every 4 bars. And so I was going to either use Bach, but I decided to use Beethoven's Ode to Joy, or at least the first half of it.
Sure.
It's the first, I guess, 16 bars, and I guess there's probably 32 bars of it.
Yeah, the huge choral movement that you hear most of the time.
So when you look at it, it's the beginning of it, it's like going bum, bum, bum. And so it's like gold, gold, green, red, gold.
Yeah.
Kind of. And so, and basically, I just wanted to see what it looks like, and it looks really cool. So.
It does. It's a great piece.
Really cool.
And it's great to hear that you do representative pieces like that. I used to actually have a guy that would call in, and it was whenever I was doing something wild. Like I remember one time I did a musical interpretation of the story of the fallen angels from the Book of Enoch. And he was just so enthralled by it. He was like, I don't know what it is about some of the stuff that you write, man, but I want to paint it. He's like, I'm busy. Like he would call in from the woodlands like every 2 or 3 months and be like actively painting to the music that was playing on the radio. And I thought that was so dope that somebody was like creating art with my art, like using my art as inspiration for the movement of their brush. So I got to give you a piece to maybe interpret sometime. That would be
would love to do
that would be interesting.
I've done one other piece that was an interpretation of a lyric of a song, and I've thought of some other ones. I have one of a big crimson rose growing through a chain link fence, which is from the opening line of a Jimmy Dale Gilmore song.
Okay.
So, but.
That sounds awesome.
Well, and it's interesting talking about what we're talking about right now.
That's a lyrical interpretation and not a musical interpretation.
Indeed.
Because we were originally talking about a musical interpretation.
Yeah,
which is a different thing.
Well, it is, but it's an interpretation nonetheless. I mean, whether it be lyric, and it's odd for me because I was a poet before I was a musician, and one led to the other naturally. And then slowly one thing took over the other. And I think it was because like my ex in Maine at one point just didn't like the way I sang and was like, man, that's all right. Like, cool, you wrote a song. Okay. So I just stopped writing lyric music, and it's hard for me now. Like at one point I wrote like at least a song a week. Like easily. I have like tomes of songs that I've written. Half of them are garbage, absolutely. Just like any artist, like it used to blow my mind that my buddy Billy from the Scary Dad podcast would literally write a poem and just like throw it away. And I was like, what are you doing? Like that's that's a frozen moment in time.
I've never done that, even when I write down
even from your sketches, things like that. I
don't intentionally
do you just turn the page and
and I've never done when I'm writing. I never like wad up the paper and throw it.
Right. Me either. Yeah,
I will mark out stuff.
Same here,
but usually in a way that I. Because sometimes you think, well, maybe I liked part of what was still in there.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
So,
and to me, it's one of those...
I'm like that.
My brain's wanting it out for a reason.
Sure,
my brain's pumping this out for a reason.
You feel a lot better when
I may not know what the reason is right now, but going back and reading that 2-3 years from now may mean something totally different.
Yeah.
Some type of release,
And I don't ever throw any painting. I mean, I have some like kind of crappy half done paintings, even from when I was younger, and just kind of did it for fun,
Sure.
But I still can go back and look at them, and I've actually gone back and pulled out a bunch of fiction stuff that I've written.
Nice.
Like I have like 4 unfinished novels that I didn't finish for one reason.
That's something that I wish I could do. I can't do it.
I can do it, I can't do it every day.
I can write a great monologue, but I cannot write outside of myself.
Oh, interesting.
for some reason. I can't write characters.
Huh.
I
One of
can't
the
like
major-
step into another like how Stephen King describes it, like stepping into a character's head. Like
That's
the,
one of the major-
character already exists.
Like
I'm just interpreting
or something.
it.
Yeah.
You know?
That's one of the main reasons why I end up writing something is because I am trying to imagine why something would have happened or why somebody would have thought something.
Mm.
Like I have an entire, I would say probably about 2/3 of a pretty decent novel. I mean, I went back and looked at a bunch of the stuff to kind of review it objectively and think, oh, actually, it's pretty good. You know, you forget you wrote it.
Right,
You're like,
right.
oh, I wrote that. That's
Right.
pretty good, actually.
Yeah.
And then you think, well, maybe it just had to do with what I was thinking at the time and no one else would really care.
Yeah.
But as a reader, you go back and read, it's like, no, that's actually legitimately fairly good.
Right.
And one of them was entirely from the position of a woman who wasn't this woman I knew, but she was kind of based. The character was based somewhat on a woman I knew, mainly because I was just trying to figure out what the hell is going on in this person's mind. Like I was just like, why does she act the way she does?
Yeah.
Right.
And so I was trying to write a first-person story from this person's point of view, really just so I could kind of
grasp why
what
they
the
were the way they
fuck
were.
is she thinking?
Just decode them as
Like
a person.
I was trying to take a person through actions that were like similar choice, type choices.
Yeah.
It wasn't like I wasn't stealing somebody's life or anything, but I was like, why would somebody do that?
Yeah, like why would somebody? What is that motivation? It's interesting because I was talking about Billy Stewart from the Scary Dad podcast. Everybody, please go out, check out the book Hydrophobic. It is a collection of short stories from writers in Houston that is all going to be donated to. All the proceeds are going to Harvey victims right now.
Oh, good.
So it's a collection of short stories, like horror stories, things like that. Billy,
What's that name again?
Hydrophobic is the name of the book. So go out and check that out. You can find it on Amazon. You can find it on some other sources. But it's really neat. Billy Stewart from Scary Dad actually wrote a short story that is premiered in there. So mad props to you, Billy Stewart. Way to go. And way to go with the Halloween show. The Scary Dad Halloween show was fantastic. It was great. It was well received by everybody. Can't wait to do it again next year. Scary Dad is also a member of the brand new HC Universal Network.
Yeah.
So welcome to the family of podcasts. Billy and Scott Fontenot, also known as Scary Dad and Swamp Thing. So on that note, let's start getting into the topic now that we're a couple beers in. We're a little loosed up. We were talking about it beforehand. It was revealed this last week that through a scientific experiment, and we're all three of us here are aware of the works of Edgar Cayce.
Oh yeah.
And he said, for those of you that aren't aware of his works, go on to the post from today. There's a link. You can go read all the readings of Edgar Cayce. He gave readings specifically about the Great Pyramid of Giza and about how there would be found a secret chamber that held the technology of Atlantis that helped build the pyramids, things like that.
And just when you say readings, basically he would go into a trance and read what he called the Akashic Records, which is some sort of
it's conscience of the universe type you can tap into.
Well, it's the collective. It's the collective unconscious,
right?
Is what it is. It's the knowledge that we all have intrinsic within us,
right?
Call it the seed of
just
grace.
Able to
call it whatever you want. I call it the mental interweb. I actually wrote a book years ago, The Panderings and Ponderings on the I and Chi, and it was like a book of free verse poetry about stuff.
There's many of inventors
and the second part, which is yet to be finished, I talk about how we are all interconnected like a web, just like a spider web. All of our emotions are connected. Like, that's why you can walk into a room and feel like you're in a bad place.
Man, when I was in high school, I used to say this thing that colors were in the air because, if I would have one green shirt and I would wear that green shirt and everybody would wear a green shirt that day.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, or some, or a purple,
Yeah.
some weird thing.
Just
It's like,
those
how come
synchronous
everybody wore their pink shirt today?
Yeah.
How did everybody
Yeah.
wear their pink shirt today?
Those synchronous things that for some reason we are just
Something,
in
right?
tune with.
And it happened often enough that I had a phrase for it. I said, certain colors are in the air
That's
in
it.
certain
That's
days.
it. And
I was like 17.
There's a
But it was something that you observed.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, it's always like the day that I wear my one fucking pink shirt is the same day that
the
everybody
day I'm trying to
in the
stand
damn
out.
school wears a pink
Everybody
shirt.
goes salmon, and
Yeah.
what are you
Like,
gonna
how
do?
did that happen?
And
Everybody got the memo.
It happens. It happens frequently in society, though. In music, it happens all the time. It's called synergy, where you're actually like on the same syncopated wavelength. It happens a lot with jam bands, stuff like that,
true
where
that. Yeah.
you're going and you're in between stuff, and just like the Grateful Dead, somebody would strike one chord, and everybody knew exactly where they were going.
Yeah.
Like everybody knew the next song coming up and how to lead into it. And it is this
synergy.
It is this synergy that happens between us. There's an
I've
electricity
been there
that
at a
happens.
Willie Nelson concert more than once,
Yeah,
or more than one Willie Nelson concert.
and I as a sound guy, the bands I loved working with, whether they were jam bands or like prog rock, what have you, were the bands that I connected with through the audience. Like I felt that electricity emanate from the stage through the audience to my sound booth, and like I was like an active part of that show going on. There were many times where I was on autopilot, and it's just a show, man. It's just another band.
yeah.
We got 5 of them tonight, whatever. But there were some bands, and just the other night I was listening to a band beyond description. Shout out to all you boys up there in Portland, Maine. I know y'all are still together and playing in a form, but I was listening to their first show at Buck's Naked Barbecue, and it was just like I felt electrified listening to the live recording. And it was just like I was right there again, and like listening to them and feeling the live vibe. And it was like, oh my God, this is so good. Yeah. And there is that connection, that strange energy that happens. And when you learn to tap into that, like I'm sure, like you said, the concept of the Ojo de Dios artwork came to you in a dream, like this concept, this idea. I've had things come to me in dreams, and it's interesting how whenever you do put that little bit of push behind it, something happens.
A lot of my
manifests
better
itself.
ideas have come from dreams.
Yeah.
Or like 1 or 2, 3 people recommended it to me.
Yeah.
Shout out to my friend Donnie Hack. By the way, I've got some magnets for you that Donnie Hack.
Nice.
Yeah.
I'm all about it.
Dude, that's
I'm all
sick.
about it. And, where we were going with this, folks, was talking about the Akashic Records, talking about something that, no, absolutely. It's all tied together, because if people understand it at that basic level of synergy between musicians, then they can understand the fact that there is a collective unconscious that happens beyond all of us, and a realm of knowledge
And we're
that
all
exists
linked to it.
beyond all of us.
Oh, yeah.
Sweet. Heck yeah.
These are so nice.
I was going to say, pop one of those on the studio fridge over there, bro.
Nice.
Heck yeah. Because I done gave out all your matches. I got one book left.
These are nice.
Those are my emergency fire.
I like it.
And you like my
I do.
little,
The repurposed cigarette case.
Yes.
It's classy. But it is talking about, with Edgar Casey, and especially his readings on the Great Pyramid of Giza. He spoke about there being a secret chamber that would be found, that in the pyramid complex that would contain the secrets that built the pyramids, the technology from Atlantis, the lost knowledge from Atlantis. And it's interesting that for years, the one thing that has stood out about the Great Pyramid of Giza is that, as opposed to most other pyramids, it is quite obviously not a tomb.
It's not used for what it should
because
be.
because there's a sarcophagus there, but there's no writings, and there's no way that a tomb would be built for a king to go into the afterlife
all the other ones
with no spells to go into the afterlife, because that's what all those intricate hieroglyphs are, folks, is readings from the Book of the Dead, things like that, to help carry the spirit.
And there's normally these rocks with the prayers on it also kind of surrounding.
Yeah, there's no shapti present, which are the actual innards of the mummy. There's no mummy present. There's nothing inside. The Great Pyramid of Giza is devoid of any decoration. Which, for something that's supposed to be a funerary monument, is pretty incredible, and has been espoused in different theories for years as to why that's the case. Now, when it comes to the Great Pyramid of Giza, what do you think its purpose was? Why do you think they built the Great Pyramid to begin with, Chris?
You're asking me that?
I'm asking you this.
Well,
because it was a huge undertaking, decades and decades of building.
You have like 2.3, I think, million blocks of that limestone granite stuff, each weighing like 2 to 20 ton each.
Yeah,
of blocks. So it was massive,
huge. So why do you think that they would build something like that to begin with? As an artist, as someone who builds for the sake of building.
Well, that's an interesting way to frame the question.
Yeah.
And of course, it is just going to be what I think, because
that's all this episode is.
People believe they know things when you really don't even have any way of knowing that, because I've never been to the Great Pyramid in Giza.
Me neither.
I just assume it exists.
I'd love to visit
Delaware. I've never been there. I just take it for granted.
Unfortunately, Delaware exists.
Yeah. So.
I'm here to tell you.
So first of all,
bro.
It is just what I think about it. But one, I do know that recently, this is one thing that I believe that I know, is that recently that people who spent their whole lives studying archaeologists have determined that really the people who work there, unlike what we've seen in like the movies, the Ten Commandments and things, weren't slaves that were being whipped by the evil Pharaoh.
Yeah, I know.
That it was a big work project, and that basically everybody that were there were basically craftsmen and professionals, just like people who go to work on a dam or a big building or something, or a football stadium, and that they were getting paid and probably getting paid accordingly to what they were worth. The people who weren't worth a whole lot probably were getting paid crappy.
Were there slaves involved? Most definitely.
There were slaves that existed, but the people that were doing most of the work weren't slaves, because they were
They weren't the ones setting the stones. They were the ones hauling stones or doing stuff like that.
Or doing the boats or something,
exactly.
Where you're moving things around.
Well, and that's the misconception, like you said, movies like...
But basically it was a big work project, and people were being paid to be there.
Oh, absolutely.
And the currency was probably just food and nice status.
Well, beer.
They gave them places to live.
We were talking about before the show that is one of the literal first notations of beer in history, is the fact that it was a part of the workers' rations.
Well, if that's what everybody that know and around is getting, and you're going to want to get that share. And they gave them like days off and stuff. They didn't treat them like slaves. They actually treated them like...
That's what I'm saying. It wasn't like...
It was just equivalent to like a hard-ass job net.
It wasn't the Israeli slaves... in their time of bondage that built the Great Pyramids or anything like that.
So I do believe that I know that, because I think that they can look at it and kind of prove to you with, things you can
But why take on such a monumental...
But here's some other things that I believe that I've heard that I don't know are true that I've heard. But we were talking about that like the chamber isn't decorated at all. I've heard that if they've done mineral tests on there, that there's been water in there, and that there are certainly systems for water underneath that, and that there, like when you look at mineral content, that there aren't too many leaps that you could take as somebody who isn't an archaeologist or a historian. If you were more of an engineer or an electrician, that it could have been used as a power plant.
Right.
It's a huge battery.
Water and salt.
as a
And
huge
that
battery.
being said, there is a huge ancient network of pyramids all over the world
There sure are.
that are interconnected that you could reasonably think that there are ways to transmit things back
many
and forth.
many of them over underwater aquifers, things like that, which
Over water, exactly.
which
particularly
running water,
in Mexico. Exactly.
running water, ladies and gentlemen, believe it or not, carries a natural current inside of it.
And they're made out of granite and
Nice.
things that are natural current carrying.
Conductors.
They're
I mean, granite in and of itself is basically a semiconductor, folks. It's got copper, or not copper, it's got carbon, it's got quartz, and feldspar.
and we were talking earlier before the
It's
show
like a big capacitor waiting to happen.
about history being what's written down, and that there are certainly many, many things that have actually occurred that aren't part of what is called history because they aren't written down.
Yeah.
But that just because
Right.
either they weren't written down because nobody knew how to write them down or didn't have a language, they weren't written down because
Well, they definitely
you
had a
didn't
language.
want to show anybody else a written language.
Right.
You didn't want to
Forbidden.
show anybody else, or they've been expunged for
Yeah.
some reason. Like,
Well, they definitely had a
or
written
either
language.
intentionally or accidentally.
And they did actively.
Whatever was
Well,
rumored.
not every culture has a written.
No. But the Egyptians definitely did.
A control of information.
Well, the
They had
Egyptians
they had
certainly
Coptic,
did.
which was their written language, and then they had hieroglyphics,
Well, that's a different thing.
which was their religious
Basically,
language.
what I'm saying is that there are many things that just because we don't have that
Yeah.
written knowledge in our history
Doesn't make it not true.
doesn't mean it weren't true.
Right.
That's true.
And another thing that, as we were saying earlier, there's no fucking way human beings just figured out electricity 200 years ago.
Right.
No.
That they, you just notice it in any intelligent human being. I mean, geneticists will tell us that human beings now are the same intelligence as human beings a million years ago.
Right.
And that if people are sitting around looking at nature, there's no way they're not figuring out the same things that people are figuring out. And I know people were flying around the world, at least in balloons, because nobody is sitting there looking at smoke go up in the air and doesn't think, hey, I bet I could do that.
Well, remember,
Tell me.
I've got 2
Exactly.
points on. I've got 2 points on
Totally
all of
agree
that,
with
Chris.
that one.
Hot air balloon.
I've got-
easy to fucking figure out.
I've got 2 points on all of that, Chris. Number one, there is evidence amongst gold artifacts.
And then we'll talk about boats.
Gold artifacts that have been found in tombs in Egypt that show signs of electroplating because they are not made out of solid
Then you
gold.
have to know how
And
to do
Iraq,
electrolysis.
there are batteries in our
They're-
Babylonia.
And you are more advanced than what the
yes.
history says, and if that's true.
Well, and that's
Yeah.
just it. The Baghdad battery.
Yeah, I was going to say, Baghdad battery is for one instance.
all of history is more advanced
Yeah.
than anybody says.
And
that
the
they
Baghdad
are.
battery was simply a copper sleeve with a zinc rod.
You can't go
And that's
plate
it.
something without electrolysis.
All you got to do is put some lemons in it, put some orange juice in it, put some salt water in
And
I
it.
think they use wine or
And
something.
that's
to
the one that
grapes or
they
something.
found. So what I'm telling you
That's
is
just it.
there's so many things that existed, like the Antikythera device,
Yep.
that no one's ever found, and just until you accidentally found it. It would be like that the Austin cell phone. Like
Yeah.
somebody will
Well-
find this thing right here and go, "What the hell is
And me
this?"
and my wife-
like, this doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
Me and my wife talk all the time about what's going to happen 200 years from now when somebody uncovers Disney
Right.
and thinks that we all worship this huge mouse.
Well, but how much?
because of all the images
Well, here's a
of
question.
Mickey Mouse
Of
that
a
have been
freak
Two
found
things I'm going to
across
say
the
on
country.
Disney. First of all, how much of it?
That's a good
How much
analogy.
of it will exist because of the materials it's made out of?
True that.
Second of all, I bet you it will be underwater. And
Yep.
so if
It
things,
will be. It'll
so
be
if
the
there
new
wasn't a
Atlantis.
civilization that had electricity and that people could were using television
Now-
and all kinds of things 10,000 years ago,
I said I had 2 points.
their most populous place was going to be by the coast, as
That's
are,
right.
and which are all way underwater. And
And-
so if you say, well, where are all those cities? Well, it's because they're underwater.
Yeah.
Well, and I said I had 2 points.
And
You
they're
were
not there
talking-
anymore,
You were
'cause they're
talking about the fact that
washed away.
that they had to have had hot air balloon
There you go.
technology.
That's
Okay?
just on the side. They definitely had boats. And
They
that's
definitely
the
did.
thing.
And
Yeah.
but
They had these
there is
boats.
evidence in pottery from Nazca because it's always been said, how are the Nazca lines made? Even with standard surveying, how can you make the Nazca lines that precise?
Yeah.
Even with modern day
You
surveying,
couldn't see what you were doing.
but they have found pottery that shows like a pyramid-shaped balloon over people in a basket with a controlled fire.
Hello.
And why is
Like
that
made out of
hard to figure
paper.
If you had 100 of the smartest people in your whole community
Right.
who were figuring out how do we do this, I bet somebody would fucking figure that out.
Right.
Oh yeah.
You know, I bet somebody would say,
But the hot air balloon wasn't discovered.
goes up in the air.
But the hot air balloon didn't
Somebody,
come
yeah.
out again till the late 1800s.
Tell me that didn't happen. Well,
know?
so, but the main thing is with boats.
I'm just saying
that
those
they
are both
did-
technologies that we think are modern day shit. Electroplating gold,
Right.
And hot air balloons. Hot air balloons were, of course, like I said, the late 1800s, actually 1700s, because they were used in the last part of the Revolutionary War. They were used in the first part of the Civil War for observation.
Somehow we
decks,
got
things
disconnected
like
because
that.
all this
How
shit
long have they been doing
done.
those floating Chinese lanterns? They figured that out way before. I mean,
Sure, but to scale that up to size to be able
that's
to carry
just
a
hard
couple
for me to
people.
imagine. Thinking, well, how could you ever put a person in that? You know, somebody thought of that. Yeah. But the other thing is, they're getting boats,
Yes,
and
Yes.
they come to this
And-
country.
and-
So
and-
we're going to talk about.
and not in the way you think, folks. We
Not the
are
way
not
you think.
getting political about
Yeah,
this
no.
with people coming over on boats
You
to this
have to
country.
have knowledge of buoyancy, right? Of building boats.
There is more than one. What we're referring to
Carry massive
is the
people
fact
in a boat.
that number one, let's get back to pyramids because that's where this stems from. Is the fact that there are pyramids
chamber.
all over the world. All over the world. The use of the pyramid is found.
And you know what?
in Mesoamerica.
You know what's crazy,
the
though? The
lost
Earth-
empires of Atlantis.
The Earth itself
Chris
has
Oglesby
an electrical
just
grid, you know.
It does.
And what's weird is a lot of these ancient sites and stuff is, you know, and the Great Pyramid is on one of those nodes.
Actually,
Talking about
the
electricity.
interesting thing about the Great
Yes.
Pyramid of Giza is that it lies on the exact specific center of the Earth's pull.
Exactly,
Like
yeah.
it lies
on the major
precisely in the center of the Earth. Like bam, there you have it.
I'm just asking this not in a challenging way, just in a not being. What is your source for that? How do you know that?
They have done geological
Just as
studies
far as
with
magnetic
it.
studies of, like,
it points directly to magnetic north, and it lies like precisely in the center of the landmass
Yeah.
of the Earth.
From yeah, I got
Yeah.
it. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I was just wondering what your source was.
Yeah.
If it wasn't just some guy you heard.
No.
It's the belly button of the world.
No. It's definitely not that situation. That's much more like Mount Fiji.
That's a
is
big
considered
belly.
Yeah,
Mount Fuji,
or any
is
like thing
considered
like
the
that.
belly button of the world.
The reason I brought up that Gavin
Yeah.
Menzies book because
and you've brought that up before
Oh,
whenever
nice.
we've mentioned
Yeah,
things
because
like
he,
that.
Yeah, I brought it up.
I mean, and I sent you that. I think it was Craig Childs.
Yeah.
Because they're people who are not traditional experts in the field of like archaeology or history.
Yeah.
But they are extreme experts in other fields. Like Menzies is a seaman. I mean, he's an expert in sailing and going around the world.
Yeah.
He was a naval person.
Okay.
And he just recognized certain things about the way the currents work and just realities of the world that people. I think his first book was at 1424 about the Chinese Navy, where there's documents that essentially, if you read the Chinese history,
that show the
which
fact
is
that they
written
made it to the
down,
Pacific coast
they
of
really
America.
probably were probably down as far as L.A. even.
Exactly, and there are
there's
cases,
a-
there are actual artifacts under the water that look like round Chinese anchors that they used, like
Very
these stone
interesting.
anchors.
It's real
And I'd
easy
like to
to
say
interpret.
hi to the Snarky of Oz who just chimed in. I'd also like to say happy birthday.
What's up, Snarky?
Julie Connolly is not here today because it is her husband Brian's birthday. So happy
Tomorrow.
birthday, Brian Connolly, and happy
What's up
birthday
with
tomorrow
Snarky?
to you,
Yeah.
Christopher Uncle Jay
my birthday,
Oglesby.
and I am here.
That's right.
You got
That's
a
right.
question, Snarky?
So, yeah, feel free to ring in on anything
Ask
you
us
want,
any
Snarky.
questions.
The chat window is open, folks. So
Ask
if you
us
would like
anything.
to ring in, feel free. And yeah, you were talking about the Chinese making their way over
They were
here.
certainly here. One interesting
The
genetic
Vikings
thing,
were certainly here.
So this is somebody once again who's an expert who's willing to go outside of the field of archaeology and ask other experts about things, which I think is interesting.
Love you too,
because
Snarky.
one thing he claims, which I don't know, I have not personally
Maybe it's
verified, but he claims this in the book, is that the famous wild Mustangs that are in Nevada
Yeah.
in the western deserts.
Okay, yeah.
That those,
What about it?
when they are genetically tested, they are Mongolian horses.
Yes.
They're not Spanish
Nope.
leftover horses. They are horses that came off of Chinese
Yeah.
ships,
Yeah.
and that they've been there longer than any Spanish horses
yeah.
were ever
Playing that
there.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, no, then and then
Well, because the
then
local
they'll show, like,
indigenous Indians talk
Mayan
about them longer than
jade
yeah.
jaguars, and they'll put it right up next to a contemporary Chinese temple jaguar that looks exactly the same.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're just like, well, there were
that's
certainly settlements. The Japanese were
The
definitely
Chinese
going to
had
Peru.
pyramids.
Yes, they do.
The Polynesians, who kept moving farther and farther east and discovering things farther and farther east up to Hawaii. They just kept going, and
All the way
they
down
got
past Easter
to
Island.
South America. Well, yeah, they got to Easter Island, and so to think that they stopped there is crazy.
Yeah.
They didn't go to the biggest thing. They didn't just keep going till they hit
Well,
the biggest thing
and
they
to
were
make
going to
it
hit.
to make it back.
That just is insane.
to make it a little
Yeah.
to think
circuitous
that they
here.
wouldn't do it.
to
And
make
that Thor Heyerdahl
Exactly.
proved all that.
Yeah.
It's so possible to do it.
Oh yeah,
Then
no.
in fact, you'd almost have to be an idiot on those boats to
There
not
was
just
somebody-
accidentally have it happen.
there was somebody that actually just
There's
took,
no accident.
that actually just took like a traditionally made Peloponnesian watercraft
Yeah, Thor
and-
Heyerdahl did that in the 50s.
and like I think sailed it around the world if I'm not
right,
mistaken.
and
You
the
know,
Phoenicians.
like-
So we were talking about the Atlanteans.
Yep.
Well, I mean, to bring it back to the pyramids, there have been mummies found with traces of coca.
So
in
it
the
was
mummy.
certainly happening. This is
So,
the whole point.
which
is
is
what we
nowhere
learned in
near where
history.
they're at.
The only place that grows is South America. That's it. Like that's the only
Yeah.
climate that it grows in. So that means that there had to have been that's the only possibility is that there had to have been a trade route to South America. And the Egyptians were good seafaring people. They made a good living off the sea. They made, quite a good
I
job
think that I'm
fishing.
going to beg to differ with you that the Egyptians actually weren't. And
Really?
the Egyptians historically relied on
What they did.
a seafaring, and a lot of their history talks about a unknown named seafaring culture that they relied on.
Okay.
For a lot of their materials.
Sounds like Atlanteans or something.
Yes. Another thing that I do know is factual is that there are huge voids of what were tin deposits in the Great Lakes in North
Yeah.
America.
Yep.
And
Well, and copper.
that would go
Copper.
into making bronze.
Yeah.
And none of
And
that
copper.
exists in America.
Yeah.
I mean, they can't find if they were all mined out, they can see
Yeah.
where it was pulled out.
Mhm.
None of that is, and they can find ore that they can identify from those Great Lakes mines in the Mediterranean Ocean.
Yes.
So there were certainly Europeans and Africans that were regularly sailing to North America and trading and using that. Well, why is there no history about that? Why is Christopher Columbus the first one to tell us
never
about
made
that?
it to North
because
America.
it was a secret.
Yeah, he never even
they
made
didn't
it.
want to know. Those people got so rich selling that
Story.
bronze
And a story. Yeah.
to the Egyptians.
Yeah.
They're just like, where are you getting it? Well, we're not going to tell you
Well,
where we're getting it.
No.
Trade secret.
Well,
we have
and
a patent on
number
that
one,
idea.
We've been asked to take a swig for the
But it's
Snarky
so
of Oz
easy to
for their
believe.
past birthday. So Happy past birthday to the Snarky of Oz.
Hey, Snarky,
And,
we're drinking
and
for
happy,
you.
happy birthday
Cheers.
to Mr. Connolly and to Mr. Oglesby.
Happy birthday to Brian.
Yeah.
Happy birthday, Brian.
You know, but there were copper deposits that were also in North America that we know that Vikings came over for. And an interesting concept is the fact that of the lost tribe of Israel. It's been said for a long time that the Lost Tribe was actually here in North America.
Oh, the Grand Canyon.
Yes.
There's lots of stuff in the Grand Canyon. I'd sent you that information about that Craig Childs, who is another person who's a complete lay person who's written a great deal and knows more than a lot of specialists in their fields because he has gone and asked all those separate specialists different things. And there most certainly was a very sophisticated, advanced civilization in the southwestern part of the United States, going all the way from like northern Utah down to southern Mexico. That ironically they were moving back and forth with the weather exactly the way people are migrating across the Mexican border now.
And when
it's
you're
stuff
talking,
that's been going on forever,
especially about the strange tablet that was found that is supposedly in an ancient form of Hebrew, stuff like that dates back to that time, and you're talking about a lost tribe of Israel, everything
and
else.
things like Chaco Canyon that are these super powerful.
Who else would possibly have a trade route and to trade people in Egypt other than a lost tribe of Israel?
Well, no, I'm saying anybody. This is my point, is that there was so much more world commerce than anybody now is willing to. People say, well, how could people 10,000 years ago have possibly have done that? Well, how do people now fucking do it? They did it the same way. I don't think anybody they made the same observation, and civilizations have come and gone and been so sophisticated that we've never heard of, which is what's going to happen to us. All of our stuff is on computer and our cell phone, and when it's all gone, no one's going to remember that that's there. Yeah. And they're going to think we weren't any smarter than Mount Rushmore or whatever that is. I mean, our highway system won't be. That's probably the biggest thing the United States has ever done, and that'll go away in a couple hundred years. I mean,
not even without maintenance. Have you ever seen the show?
Right, it'll fall down
when humanity ends or something like that on Discovery
that.
Channel. But it's disturbing. Dude,
I love that because
the fact that without maintenance, like look at Detroit.
My brain works that way.
Go look at pictures of Detroit right now. Like there are parts of Detroit that have not been maintained for 5 or 6 years.
It's like the apocalypse over there,
dude. It looks like some Walking Dead ass shit. Like there are
all
buildings falling down
dude,
and
just like
all kinds of stuff. And it's because of 10 years of disrepair and non-maintenance.
Well, it's ability to look at progress or at a process, I think.
Well, yeah, because I mean, like
it's
we
just
were
to
saying,
realize that
they built things out of solid
be
stone.
There very long.
They built things out of solid stone. We build things out of an amalgam.
Right. And we feel like we have a very great concept of everything that we know about them because of the things that were carved in stone.
Yeah.
When there is a very high possibility that a lot of their communications, as we're saying, could have been electronic or held in quartz or things like that.
There you go. There you go.
I actively
and there's no reason to think that couldn't be possible, and we don't have any proof of it. We don't have what people want to call proof.
I'm right there,
but there's absolutely no reason to think that couldn't have happened, and if it did, we wouldn't know.
I think there is a lost technology.
I mean, we wouldn't know.
Right here in my hand, ladies and gentlemen.
And so it's kind of I'm not going to say it did happen, but it's very hard for me to believe that people didn't already do all those things.
In my hand.
And then their society kills themselves. Like, I wanted to talk about the Chaco people real quick. Because
the Taco people?
Well, the Chaco civilization, like the Anasazis.
Yep.
Because one of the things that we do historically know about them is what the people who were left over after they were gone said about them.
Yep.
Is that they were very advanced wizards who were good and then used bad magic, which is almost like the story of Atlantis. And it's almost like the story of like what we see on TV. It's like Battlestar Galactica.
And they didn't how these people's pyramids are the same.
Got too smart for their own good, and the
Yep.
simple farmers who were on the outside went, those people are evil. They're oppressing us with their wizardry and their magic.
Right.
Yeah.
And those people aren't there anymore.
21,
and so the
12 and
only
shit.
people that were left to tell their stories were the Stone Age people that were left after these advanced people that they talk about are gone.
Yeah.
And that, the Aztecs, who were fairly advanced, I mean, they were really more advanced than the Europeans who
The
showed
Mayans
up.
were far more advanced.
Well, when the
than the
Spanish
Aztecs
showed
even.
up in the Aztec capital, it was the most unbelievable thing there. First of all, they bathed. I mean, they actually had
Yeah, they
sanitation. Everybody was healthy and good looking, and the city was spotless, and it wasn't a giant sewer like every place in Europe at that time.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, they were at least that more advanced than Europeans at the time. But even they said of like the pyramids and the Temple of the Moon, they're like, those are people that were so more advanced than us.
Yeah.
We don't even know who they were.
Yeah.
And so those people existed.
Right.
Yeah.
Dude.
And
when you're talking about like the temple that's in the bottom of Lake Titicaca and, stuff like that. And when you're talking about, places like Tiwanaku, when you're talking about places, even in Mayan tradition, Chichen Itza, stuff like that. And the god Quetzalcoatl, the serpent god that came down.
And isn't it weird how all their pyramids and stuff are kind of like same, like the engineering to it, and the way they're built, and
they have the same symmetry
very close
as
to
an
the same.
Egyptian pyramid.
Yeah.
And there are pyramids in India. There are pyramids
and yet so far apart.
There are
on
pyramids in
continents.
China that tend to be a little bit more like the first pyramids in Egypt, where they're a little bit longer and taller than they are short and squat.
But common sense would tell you kind of maybe these people had some type of connection or communication to kind of,
exactly.
I mean,
and then it got broken up, and then there's no evidence of it. It's like, well, look, there's no proof that happened.
Yeah.
Well,
Right.
Yeah, because it got all broken up and destroyed.
Yes.
For some reason.
Yeah.
Which very easily could have been the breakup of any of the major civilization that was connecting them all.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which was that Gavin Menzies argument, is that it was what we call, just for lack of a better word, the Minoans.
Yes.
And that those people were actually all over the planet.
Well,
and that these
the Minoan
circular things you
society
see,
we
like
know-
Stonehenge, and things that are all over the
Currents?
planet, were things that they were just setting up around, that they were doing. And the reason why we don't know about it is because none of the extant civilizations got their history.
Yeah.
We don't have their
think it was
history.
filtered.
Their
Well,
history died and went away.
We know that
because
somebody culled
they got
it out.
destroyed.
Well, and we know that the Minoans existed. We know that
And we
culture
certainly
existed.
know a lot of their bases were destroyed.
The
too.
ones that we're curious about are Atlantis and Lemuria, which are supposedly the two
The
really
Casey
advanced the advanced civilizations.
Why would they want
that
to do this,
existed.
like keeping this knowledge from,
And
you know what I mean?
Like I was
Erasing
saying,
it.
what I'm actively holding in my hand
knowledge is
is
power.
what is
Yeah.
known as a Lemurian crystal.
Oh, great.
And the way you can tell a Lemurian quartz crystal as opposed to a normal quartz crystal is on one side or many sides, you will have continuous striations all the way down.
May I touch your
Yeah, absolutely.
your crystal?
Absolutely. And those striations are supposed to be like memory files. They're supposed to be
Really?
like
Yeah.
stored data
That's really
from the Lemurian civilization. And
So it has
they're
the
very
knowledge in it.
hypnotizing. They're very wild. I have many Lemurian crystals, but that is what makes a
It does
Lemurian
seem
crystal.
like they're natural
is those-
part of
Wouldn't
the
it-
crystals.
that would
yeah.
be cool.
Oh no. It's wild because the rest of the rest
'cause you
of the
could
facets
carve that in there,
'cause-
but it doesn't look like it is.
No,
it looks like it's
it
part of the
grows that
crystal.
way,
Yeah.
and it's definitely a way that it's grown. But it's interesting because it's only on certain facets, and it's never on adjacent facets
I
that it
see.
happens. So, like, there are 6 facets
is interesting.
to a quartz crystal. It's a hexagon.
That is really
so.
interesting.
Yeah, it'll
they
be
do
on
that.
1 or 3 of the facets. Sometimes on all of them, but it's rarely like
Didn't
on
notice
2 that
that.
are just together, unless it's the whole crystal.
That is really
But-
cool.
Yeah, that's it. That's one of the many myths that come about from all of this knowledge that people have, that people have, like you said, done research with, found things, found information, found knowledge of ancient societies,
Well, also,
and especially here in America even.
The language, I mean, in Greek, Plato was the first person who referred to the word, using the word Atlantis.
Yes.
And he even said that isn't what the people who lived there called it. But it's interesting that it has that Atla root when the people in the area that we're talking about right now, that the language that we refer to it as is Nahuatl. I mean, it literally, that atoll is everywhere. If you've been to Mazatlan or eaten a tomato or a guacamole, or, I mean, those are all things that those are, and it means water, I think, which is the whole thing is Atlantis. It means what? And I think it has a similar root in Phoenician. And so it's just like, how, okay, there's no history that says that, but if you just kind of look at all these other things,
and that's
just kind of, how can you not say that?
Like you said, it comes from Plato. The first story that we have of the culture of Atlantis.
But there's all kinds of stories of things that happened that you could call that, you know? So
you would have
the first time we have the word used.
Yes, and the first time that this culture referred to with it, that literally got to a point where they were so technologically advanced that they didn't have to really work anymore. That they had time to sit around and think about greater things, bigger things, stuff like that. But the problem was they still couldn't stop the inevitable. They still couldn't stop the inevitable, which is the fact of human greed, human corruption. Technology goes awry, leads to the end of the civilization. And that's the moral lesson there. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about, because the subtext of this is ancient technologies, things like that. And you as an artist, we were talking about it before the show, and the transition of art, especially through time, going from cave paintings to cave carvings to engravings to what we know in the Middle Ages as some of the and the Renaissance as some of the highest forms of art, but yet still techniques that were scientifically crazy advanced for their time, and things that we today are using now, and we're considering it new technology, but it's stuff that's been in use by artists through research for hundreds of years. A prime example is some of the stuff that they've done with the Shroud of Turin, and the artwork involved with that, and how it could have possibly been a piece of irradiative art, all kinds of things, So let's get into a little bit of that, talking about the transition of secret knowledge and art, and how that kind of advances civilization as we know it. Because art is the meme of society. Like, whether it was the iconic art of the hieroglyphs in Egypt that were the meme of the religion that carried on the spirit of the pharaoh, or whether it's the stealing of the Sistine Chapel, or the art of Christopher Oglesby that hangs right behind him right now in the Dudes in Real studio.
Yeah, exactly.
It's something that moves people to something, and there are means by which and techniques through which this art is created, like the ancient forms of metallurgy, the ancient forms of gold plating, things like that used by the Egyptians. So let's get into some of the medieval art and some of the possible techniques that were used there to create amazing stuff.
Yeah, well, we were talking earlier about secret knowledge. I mean, I think that's where a lot of this talking about history that we don't know about that probably did happen, but there's no way to know about it. And and artists are certainly people who like to keep secrets. One thing I like to do on Instagram now with modern technology is I like to, show sort of process photos, and I think that's sort of a thing now, is to show your process photos of. And I do it myself. I take photographs of everything I'm doing in a process, so I can kind of remember how I did it.
Kind of neat, yeah.
Now, these are things that artists have always done, and like taking notes and but of course, it was one of those things you would have to learn from someone else to learn how to do these. People would make their own paints,
Sure.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
And until very recently, that was one of the things that artists had to do.
I've read of
was
one guy that
make
would
your
use
own
blood.
pigments. Well, that's just one of the things you're going to have to do, is because there weren't art stores. Think about it. That was one of the things you had to learn in that craft at the very beginning, just as an apprentice, is how to mix colors and what would produce certain colors. It's why purple was only used for Caesars and royal people, because there's almost nothing in nature that makes a purple pigment except this very rare kind of
flower,
crustacean kind of, or a squid kind of thing.
I remember the Phoenicians were big on that purple.
And it's and I don't remember what it's called, but it's really the only thing that makes purple in nature. And that was a big advance in modern textiles. Was I think in like the 1890s somebody figured out how to make purple.
Right.
And all the women started wearing purple because now you could, but you couldn't even wear purple unless you were the king.
Because it was so entirely expensive
no one knew how to
so hard to make.
Well, and even
that's why things would be darker or more earth tones, because you're using mud or iron or copper,
or using
egg yolks and tempera.
Using egg yolks are a fixative. That's what was used. Hemp seed oil and egg yolks are what were used along with crushed minerals to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel.
Oh, wow.
So these are things you would have to learn just as an apprentice. But then there are other, what we were talking about as far as technology, is I had brought up this book by David Hockney. And David Hockney.
That is technology, though. Yeah. Like knowing that certain crushed minerals, like if you look at hematite is actively a mineral of iron, but it's called black diamond. And if you look at it, it is silver, like black silver to its content. But when you crush it and mix it with linseed oil, it turns blood red.
Whoa!
And I learned different
because of its iron content.
And I'm using I use acrylic paints, which I purchase, and they at a store. I don't make my own paints, but they are made with minerals and things that make colors. And that's one thing I have to be aware of, and I learn about constantly is that the reflective quality of certain minerals,
especially after they dry, as opposed to when they're wet.
With two different colors, you're using two different types of color in things that are coloring it, and they give off a different reflective thing. So being able to blend those things together and knowing I don't want to use this particular type of paint with this kind of paint, because really just the actual physical minerals and chemicals that go into making that react in different ways than you would expect.
In an adverse reaction.
Even more so than just blending your natural colors in a color wheel. That mineral doesn't blend with that mineral very well. One trick that I do like to show when I'm showing off tricks is I like to put kind of a basic background behind whatever I'm doing. I'll pick whatever the theme is, and frequently I'll pick a background that's kind of opposite of a lot of what other tones are going to be in the front. And one of my favorites to use in the back is this cadmium red, which is a really bright metallic red. And
that was a favorite of Bob Ross.
On top of it, it makes the stuff on top of it really kind of shine and pop out. And you may not even see any of the cadmium red in the painting, but because it's behind the blue sky or whatever, it really like makes the clouds shine,
creates
glowy
the
kind of
contrast
way
and
that you're maybe not even aware of when you're looking at it. But and so those are little tricks. But then we were talking about mechanical things specifically.
Yeah, exactly.
And I had referred to this book by David Hockney, who is a living artist, and he may be, I don't know if this is true, Wikipedia may answer it, he may be the most successful living artist, like the Picasso of like now. Like the person who's like considered the most, this is this is all art argument, but I mean, he's a very successful, well-known artist in his own right. And he's written a book called
and pull that out. Yeah, you brought it with
that
you.
book.
Secret Knowledge by David Hockney. And essentially his argument, and it's an interesting argument because he's having an argument with art historians. And there's interesting emotional aspects to it too, in that he is certain that and he can track almost where it came from, where it started in Amsterdam and moved south into Italy, that early Renaissance painters such as Vermeer and Caravaggio and Velasquez and
huge Caravaggio fan,
were basically using mirrors and lenses and cameras. Essentially, they were using cameras to paint their paintings. And when I say the word camera, people today think of a camera as what they know as a product that they've all bought in our adult commercial or lives in the 20th century and 21st century. And a camera, and even its most basic idea to a lot of us, is something that chemically affixes an image to a piece of paper. Well, cameras, when we were talking about ancient knowledge, people as far back at least as ancient Egypt, we know for sure it was talked about in ancient Greece. We're aware of the fact that we can show you right now that any dummy, illiterate, intelligent human being would get it, that if you're in a dark room and there's a little teeny hole in the room, the way the light comes in, it will reflect on the wall, and it will show exactly what's going on the outside inside that dark room. And that's what happens in a camera that we have now, except Kodak figured out chemicals that can make that light stick on a piece of paper.
The silver fixative and everything
human
else.
beings figured out that happened a long thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago.
The allegory of the cave with Plato in and of itself is talking about a movie that's being
there
shown.
was an ancient Greek artist that said could paint grapes that were so realistic that birds would come down and try to eat them. For instance, I believe it was Vermeer. I think it was Vermeer. His next door neighbor was Leeuwenhoek, who was the person who invented the microscope. So he was basically a lens crafter. And so Vermeer, who's famous for doing, you look at his paintings and think, the light is so perfect, and it looks almost like a photograph. How did this brilliant artist do this?
Right.
And it's because his next door neighbor showed him how to use lenses to project an image of a model. They're always like people who are worker people too. Like they're always like in Vermeer's things, they aren't rich people. They're always people that you could have stand in a corner for a while. Hey, maid, go stand over there. And act like you're pouring the milk while I sit in a dark room with a camera projecting what you're doing, and a mirror projects it on. Now it's hard to do, as Hockney points out. I mean, you have an expert hand. You have to have an expert hand to be able to do that. And so he tries to point out that one of his arguments with the art historians is, well, they say, well, that's diminishing what they did. You're saying their talent isn't near as good. He's like, no, I'm a really good artist, and I'll actually try to do this, and it's hard. I mean, you have to be good. I mean,
still got to be good.
It's just but they say, well, there's no proof. There's none of it's written down. And his point is, well, of course it's not written down. They were like Steven Spielberg. They worked for the Pope. These were secrets.
Would you write your secrets down?
You know? They don't tell you how they do Star Wars.
No, that's a trade secret that you learn as an apprentice.
And they make lots and lots of money. Yeah. But the one thing they can tell you is that
especially Caravaggio, his work. And I mean, I spent
there are all these dark rooms.
I spent a semester
with weird light. Why would that light be?
I spent a semester in Rome.
Interesting.
And to me, the work of Caravaggio amongst anybody stands out.
You're right.
The story of his painting of Thomas is so famous. And his paintings are so realistic, so in depth that they literally pop off the canvas when you see them live. Right. And it is amazing.
And they're literally in a camera. Look at
that, the way that looks.
And there were stories about artists who would paint these popes, and they would do it, like they would come to Amsterdam and they would sit for like a day. And it's like, well, there's no way. Here's Hockney doing this. This is a camera. You can't see this if you're listening to the podcast, but basically it's just a dark little tint. And you have a hole, and it projects the light, and this is just something that human beings
onto
have been
your
noticing in nature
from the back, and you trace it out.
Yeah. People will notice. Just very recently, a phenomenon that was all over the internet was when the eclipse happened.
Yes,
and then you can see down in the light of the trees the shape of the eclipse, because it's basically working like a camera.
Yeah.
So I mean, a camera
it's refracting the light at a certain distance.
That just means dark, that just means room in Latin. That's all it means.
Yeah.
Oh, there was history stories about people who did this, where they like painted the Duomo in Florence, and they said there was somebody who had a device with a hole in it. I mean, it was described in a way that if you read it, you're saying, oh, well, he just set up a camera and painted it there.
Yeah.
Now, once again, it's not easy to do. And most of the paintings I do in my life are things that are done based on camera images. They're done on Facebook pictures that my friends have posted, or some cool thing that I saw in a movie or something like that. But it's a perfectly legitimate way of portraying an image. It's not the only way of doing it, and there's lots of other abstract ways of doing it. But Hockney's point is this is something that was certainly going on.
Yeah.
Because he can show, he did a whole board of photos of paintings from the north of Europe to the south of Europe on a timeline where you can see where that knowledge was getting spread around. Yeah. I think it was either Caravaggio or Velázquez who had never... There are no extant drawings that they ever did. There's no sketches, hand drawings in there. But in their estate, when they died, they owned 4 mirrors. And that's when mirrors cost like what?
Right.
Ferraris cost.
Yeah.
So, like, why did this artist own 4 mirrors? And never drew a picture?
I want to say that was Caravaggio.
And when his neighbor, the telescope guy?
And almost all the people that were pictured in his paintings were kind of like poor neighbors.
Yeah.
Like, you could see that in some of his paintings, like of saints, like some of the people around the tables are like, wait, that person's the same dude as that person. Because he just, like, moved him over there. Well, then how would he do that? He would just set up the camera and... in a different place.
Shoot him from a different angle.
Hands would look somewhat out of proportion because they would focus in on this. And then they would move the camera and focus on your face. He shows one of this woman standing next to a boy that looks very natural. And everything looks very realistic. But then he goes, but imagine, like, in this woman's picture, if she stood up, this one would be like 11 feet tall.
Yeah, exactly.
Because everything was like, I'm drawing the feet, I'm drawing the knees, I'm drawing the... And it would be like if you took a photograph of your face.
If
and
you
then right here.
Holy shit.
And right here. And that wouldn't really look supernatural. But they didn't really know it. They were just trying to make it look as realistic as possible.
Yeah.
And so in their mind, they did it, but they were using this tool. And so Hockney's saying, look, I'm proving that this happened. But then art historians demand that there be some written document that that's what artists did then.
Yeah.
Or
They
that-
want proof.
Well,
Right.
the fact that Vermeer lived next door to
Yeah.
Lowenhoek isn't enough proof.
Yeah.
He knew that guy.
Yeah.
The telescope dude.
The only other guy in North America that knew how to make lenses.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And his next door neighbor just happened to be the most photographic painter in the world.
Yeah.
So it's, well, he never wrote down that he
They
did
want
it. Well,
proof.
of course he didn't want to tell you he did that.
Yeah. Yeah.
The
And-
art historians are just afraid of diminishing the credentials or whatever, like you were saying earlier. You know, it's like, so what of it if we find out later, now that we're smart enough to find out, okay, this is what they did or whatnot. I mean, we still
They
appreciate
were smart enough to do it. It was art.
Yeah.
brilliant.
Yeah,
They
it's
made
still
great
art.
art.
Brilliant.
Still great.
It
It's
does
like-
not make it any
Yeah.
less good.
Exactly.
I mean,
Yeah.
good
It
God.
made them more brilliant.
Yeah, exactly, right? Exactly. It's like how
It
you
made them
just
George
described.
Lucas.
Is how
Yeah.
you described
How
how you
did
would
you
still
just do that?
Yeah.
Da Vinci made working automatons.
If not, it made it even. It was even harder.
Da Vinci made actual working robots that
Yeah.
were on display in the houses of the Medicis
Yeah.
and stuff like that at
And there
dinner
were
parties,
many
where it was
things
like
like
a
that.
horse that walked across. Like
There were things like
here's
that
this-
in
the
ancient
automaton?
Egypt.
Yeah,
There
yeah,
were things like that in ancient Greece.
absolutely. Well, you were talking about the Antikythera mechanism earlier, and they've actively
was
shown
that the one they found in the ocean?
Yes.
Yeah, the rusted
Yeah.
up one or
off the
whatever,
off
yeah.
the island of Antikythera
with like 36 something
And-
different gears or something in it, right? Yeah.
Well, and they've figured out the fact
They're
that
like,
it,
what the?
It's an extremely
Yeah.
sophisticated
Yeah, for, like-
astronomical
Yeah,
computer
exactly.
that you would use you would need in order to accurately navigate the ocean.
well, and not just that, but it, but
I mean,
from
that's-
what they could
and
tell,
that's all we can think of that.
from
it was
what they
used
could
for,
tell,
right?
it also clocked out the dates of the Olympic Games.
Probably.
That it actually coincided
Yeah.
to.
Oh, it coincided. I see.
yeah,
Okay.
because everybody in each country would have one that was clocked to their, like you said, their navigational
But
distance,
when we get right
things
down-
like that, but to the
So
clock of the
obvious
Olympic
implication
Games.
is there was more than one,
Right.
and that
More
they
than
were
one.
because they were gears. It was somehow mass produced.
Yeah.
but it was probably a
And
hard
not
thing
just
to
that,
get.
but
right.
not
It was
just that,
probably-
but one of a kind for each country.
not.
Because you're talking about traveling from a different distance
Then
to the
everybody
same
was
place
connected. Then
to
everybody
arrive
was
at the
connected.
same time, and that's the theory that's been put forth.
Continents were connected.
It would have to be a different.
Each
setup.
one,
The
so, like,
gears would have to be different.
They'd have to be
Like-
geared differently for each location.
Okay.
So
Even
there's more than one
sophisticated. Even
Antikythera
more
mechanism.
sophisticated.
There's more than one
Well,
Antikythera
yeah, I
mechanism.
think it was pretty sure that.
Yeah.
Geared differently for their.
And then
Yeah.
once again, we've only found one, and
Right.
so therefore
We've only found
there's
part of one.
all- we know that they're all.
We didn't even find a whole one, which
Therefore,
brings us back to the Bigfoot situation.
We know for
Yeah, only
sure.
part of it.
You ain't
There are
even
all these
found a
things we
whole
don't
one.
know.
You even found a whole one?
You know,
Jesus.
like if you're only going to find part of an Antikythera mechanism and this thing's made out of metal, what are you going to do about a freaking Bigfoot skeleton when you're talking about wolves and things like that, hauling off part of them for dinner?
We were talking about Bigfoot.
Oh, yeah.
Way long ago, bro. That's how it works. See, we just bring it right back.
Bring it back.
But yeah, it is the fact of at what point, and we've talked about it on this show numerous times, not just here in the studio, but on the road with Randy, my brother, stuff like that, where at what point does science become religion? At what point?
Right.
Because at one point, for thousands of years, the earth was flat. Hey, there's plenty of people who still think it is.
Yeah.
But see, I
Weird.
think
kinda
that's
weird, but
bullshit.
yeah.
I think that's.
I
fake
think it is
history.
bullshit.
Because the Greeks didn't think it was flat. I mean, I
No.
bet you those Phoenicians and the people
No.
that made the Antikythera
God, they didn't think it
did
was
not
flat.
think it was flat
Yeah.
either.
Yeah.
So I think that's just baloney. I think ignorant, dumbass, like,
It makes a good story.
yeah, like
Oh no,
mouth breathers.
At
thought the world
some
was
point,
flat.
like we've said,
I don't even
this
think how most
technology
places where you
changes.
live
This
you could
knowledge changes, and I mean, the prime example is the map of Antarctica. Like, there's a map
Oh.
of Antarctica
Yep.
that existed like 1,000 or so years before Antarctica was discovered.
It outlines the actual
coastline that is underneath the ice.
And once again,
yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to say.
And once again, that is
How
one
the hell that happened?
that exists right now.
Yes.
Which
Yes.
begs the question that there most certainly were way more maps just like that existed.
Exactly.
Right.
And when you're talking about people like the Chinese, when you're talking about people like the Vikings,
where device.
Yeah.
But there's most certainly more of them that exist.
there's
one
gotta be.
great pyramid that doesn't have any hieroglyphs in it, and it looks a whole lot like it could be an electrical conductor.
and has,
Yeah.
and has like salts built up inside of it and stuff like that. At one point, if you look at pictures of the chamber, it looks like an explosion either happened inside or like it's just been lit by torch forever. You know, because it goes like darker and darker.
Wait,
as
I thought
the
they
ceiling
were
goes up.
saying that the inside the where they did the hieroglyphs, that they were very surprised that they
There
could
are
do.
no hieroglyphs in the Great Pyramid of
Oh,
Giza.
the Great Pyramid. Okay. Yeah.
There are no hieroglyphs in the Great Pyramid of Giza.
But the
We're
other
talking
ones
about
that
the
do.
King's Chamber.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
The
yeah.
King's Chamber looks like it is actively had like an explosive force.
I think it
happen
was like
inside
a
of it at one
receptor
point.
of some sort, or
Well, and I can definitely,
it's receiving, not or
like I
or
said, it is
something.
directly centered in the direct center of mass of the Earth, which is really
And
odd.
that little
And if
chamber
you
thing
know-
that points out towards, I think, Ceres, right, or some or other, or it's pointed out like whatever,
Yeah, directly to the-
But it wasn't
directly-
a burial chamber or whatever you called that. So it was more like something's coming in rather than going out.
It just couldn't have been a burial chamber
Yeah.
because there are no spells to take whoever
Yeah,
there was
yeah,
to
they're
the
normal.
afterlife.
Yeah, they're
and no
normal.
offense, if you spent that much money on your burial chamber, you got fucking jet, bro. You didn't get your friggin' spells to get to the afterlife. Like that contractor just left you high and dry. Like good God, if only things like what's Angie's List and shit like that.
Angie's List.
Did you see the Angie's List ad for that?
Yeah.
Like I spent 35 years building this monument to my father, and there weren't even spells to get him to the afterlife. Hashtag that sucks. I'll never hire this contractor again. Like.
Well, I mean, you talked about
That's the Angie's List response for the people that built the pyramids as a monument to somebody to take them into the afterlife. Like,
But I think
you gypped me.
how long did it take again to do that, to build the Great Pyramid? They speculate.
Well,
it was like a century or more, right?
No,
It
I
wasn't
don't
a
think
century.
so.
It wasn't a century. It was like 30 years.
25 or 30.
Yeah.
Really?
And what's
Okay.
interesting
Jeez,
is
I
that
thought it took longer.
No.
they've done
it wasn't.
studies, they've done scaled down studies,
Yeah.
even using what we think their technology
Right.
would have been. And where it's like, okay, we will scale it down to 1/10 of the size, 1/10 of the time, everything else, and they still cannot
No,
replicate.
I've seen some recent really good ones.
Okay.
That explain a lot of the things. Like there are slopes on the inside that they can't figure out why they might be there. Well, I'm pretty sure that they figured out how they are pull downs. And so and it answers the whole how did you get those blocks up here? And there's like where the notch is. There's a notch in it that they can tell from the sensing that there is an interior inside where they would get it up.
Yeah, a snake type structure where they built it.
Those slopes to drop down huge heavier blocks to winch up these blocks to that level. Then you move it to the corner. There's enough room to do this, and they're moving it on the inside.
The problem that
that's some engineering. Wow, that's amazing.
It's not that engineering can't be shown.
It's
really
that they've shown through
I haven't seen a study yet where they've shown that engineering being used in a scaled amount of time. Where, like, as opposed to 35 years, they have 35 days, and it's 1/10 of the size instead of, everything else, and using the same.
It made it look like it would move it really fast if you think about the way it was
Remember,
working.
the quarry is like
And the
500 miles
there's
away.
also other things that are going down. They're like, well, what are these on this
and
one
Stephen brings
pathway?
up a valid
There are these
point.
grooves, And they're like, well, what are these grooves? And then as soon as you explain, well, that's what they're putting these metal sliders on, or these wood sliders that are sliding them up, that are pulling them up. It's not slaves pushing them. There's an engineer over there on a winch with they knew how winches worked. And you just make it bigger. And there's a math to it. There's a formula. There's an algorithm. It's not guessing. Once you have that secret knowledge, once you're the architect, you know that it works every time. The master builder. I mean, there's an algorithm of the way a block and tackle works. I mean, the way a block and tackle works is just math. And once you know that, you can make the scale bigger.
Yeah, well, and there's certain
features of it that it's the only way you can describe. Like, what would this little lip be? Well, that's what they're sliding something up on.
Well, the other explanation for the lip is the tracks that you're talking about is it was an active mill that they used to hone down the stones,
move things up and down.
Well, to cut the stones and everything else. That they had huge wheels there that actively cut the granite stones on site, that kind of stuff.
So there are lots
Stephen brings up a good
engineering ways of doing it.
Stephen brings up a great point of number one. The stones that were used to build the Great Pyramids were not quarried on site.
No shit. So they were put on boats, which once again, I'm talking about why boats weren't anything that were like people didn't understand.
Yeah. They carried multiple tons of shit.
And they also understood canal, and they probably built canals and moved them around, on which, you know what, we do that now too.
Levees.
It's like people figured out how to
levees,
move stuff
keys,
around
all kinds of shit.
That's
I mean,
what
good
highways
God.
were. Highways were water were, once again, why Europeans and Asians were in North America all the time.
Yep.
Archimedes figured out how to bring water up from a river with a screw in the time of ancient Egypt. Okay?
Right. Exactly.
And that's how they irrigated a city.
And the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, probably. I mean, they just describe things like that.
Nebuchadnezzar.
Yeah. Well, and even
and he's the first one, Stephen, that we know of in written history that did that. There's no reason to think that somebody 60,000 years before that there's no record of their civilization, someplace in Siberia or somewhere who also figured that out and did all that too.
Where do you stand on the fact of there may have been a pyramid discovered in Antarctica?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Well, I certainly think that there are things in Antarctica that we don't know anything about because the climate, we know for a fact that the climate has been different in Antarctica.
Oh, yeah.
We know that there are dinosaur bones in Antarctica. I mean, it was a temperate,
a temperate zone at one point.
Yes, whether it was because of global shift or
which we know actively exists. Like if you go and look at magma formations,
so it's possible Antarctica could have been on would have been the equator.
If you look at magnetite,
so I certainly think
in
that
the lava formations
Antarctica
of Hawaii, you can see where literally the north and south has flipped every 20,000 years.
Wow.
So I certainly believe that there are all kinds of places in Antarctica that are similar to the places I was telling you about that are underwater that just no one has ever seen. No human being who's alive now, or no human being that ever wrote anything down that exists now ever saw it.
Could it be possible Atlantis was there?
It certainly could have been, because it's a place that's in the middle of the... I mean, there's...
Yeah.
I don't see any reason to think that Atlantis...
Grab me a mosaic, brother.
Couldn't have been just the idea of America that was something that was everywhere.
No. I just figured it's under ice. We don't know yet.
You could say Atlantis was a place and also lots of places. I think Atlantis could have been something like the idea of America or something.
Number one, you have to...
There's a place where it is, but where is it really? Is it New York? Is it L.A.? Is it Chicago? Or is it everywhere in the world that is America?
You also have to remember, which I'm sure you're aware of because of the education that you have and you're a lawyer, that at the time... because...
Almost oxymorons.
Almost. But you've had an education in philosophy, things like that. So you understand the fact that all of these people drew on something, that people just like Buddha just like the stories in the Upanishads, just like the stories from the Bible, just like the stories of Jesus. They're parables. They're stories that are meant to teach a lesson.
Yeah, do we want to talk more about the Edgar Casey thing?
Yeah,
I certainly think that's
because
true.
that's where we're at right now, is the fact of Edgar Casey 100 years ago saying, and I think it was actually at the foot of the Great Sphinx, but
I know, I've heard that. Yeah,
it's
at the foot of
interesting the
Great
fact
Sphinx.
that they have considered the Great Pyramid of Giza like explored, done, over. There ain't nothing else here,
No,
man.
'cause antiquities won't go all the way.
Well, and there was Zahir Hawassa for a long time who stopped a lot of things.
Right.
But at the same time, there was like the whole CNN thing of like, look, we found a new shaft, and we're going to take this robot with a camera down the new shaft
And
found in the
nothing ever
Great
happens.
Pyramid of
But
Egypt.
there's still
And we
active
found it
archaeologists there
dead
now,
end.
Yeah, hit the wall.
But oddly enough, here is this for the entire time, like, no, there are no other antechambers. There is nothing else. But yet still this scientific study shows the fact that there is a void.
Because weren't they using cosmic rays from the universe?
They were
I've seen another
studying.
gentleman
They were
use to
studying
find
quarks.
voids.
They were studying quarks and stuff like that, and that's how they came across it. And it's like, no, there is a void in the Great Pyramid of Egypt that is not mapped. Like, it's not there on the maps that we know.
And maybe you should check it out.
And, so, yeah, how do you go about checking it out even? Because, I mean, the big thing about Zahir Hawassa is the fact of,
That's a political
you're talking,
deal.
well, not just it's political, it's an ancient site. Whatever you do cannot be undone.
Right. I almost feel like it should be
Whatever
a humanity
tunnel
thing more so than
Whatever
like just an
tunnel
Egypt thing.
Yeah, but whatever tunnel you dynamite through can never be undynamited.
Oh, I see what you mean. Okay.
What happens if it causes an integrity collapse in the Great Pyramid of Egypt?
Right.
And this thing that has stood for humanity for tens of thousands of years is suddenly collapsed on one side because
we already
wanted
saw
to
what
know what's there.
Napoleon did with the Sphinx, with the
Well, and with the Great Pyramid.
Yeah.
And with the Great Pyramid.
Yeah.
Like, it was covered with white marble at one point. Like, it's shown in the distance like a beacon. Had a cap of bronze. Stuff like that,
I thought it had a cap of gold on top, didn't it? Or no?
I wasn't there.
I don't know.
Yeah, I went there. I'm talking out my ass on that one.
I may have been, according to Edgar Casey.
Yeah. But yeah, the readings of Edgar Casey in regards to ancient Egypt and Atlantis are really, really revealing, and go to speak to a lot of people's origins in research and where they start. Aside from, of course, the story told by Plato, and I believe the Phaedo, if I'm not mistaken, is the work from the 5 dialogues that contains the story of Atlantis. But those are really the two sources that we have for this culture.
Yeah, and it's I see what you're saying as far as original sources, because there's other people who have written about that subject, but Edgar Casey is one of the few to actually be claiming to give original source material. And essentially what he did that is that he was this kind of southern, really very religious Christian man, and he would go into these fits, these kind of like epileptic seizures, and but one side effect of that was people were able to discover that when he was in a trance in these seizures, he could diagnose illnesses of people, is how this originally happened. And there were a number of situations in which he literally saved people's lives.
Indeed.
Supposedly. I mean, this is apparently all documented.
Right.
And one thing about Edgar Casey's story is that everything was written down a lot. I mean, there was a lot written down.
Just Google the Edgar Casey Institute.
And also, if there's any reason to believe that the character of Edgar Casey was a real person in history, that part of his thing you have to accept about him was he was an extremely simple, moral, considered himself Christian person, and probably wouldn't have likely been somebody who would have done this for attention unless he just was.
He died
I mean,
broke.
unless that's just part of the whole story.
If this is the gift he had, why did he not sell it?
Exactly. There's,
why did he
no
died a broke
real
man.
reason to
he
think
gave
that
people
he was,
readings for free.
Right.
Like,
he never charged anybody, and that was an essential part of the whole thing.
Yeah.
And so these are things to think, well, why? I mean, maybe he was just a crazy old coot.
Maybe, but he had no vested interest.
People, and also many people believed in what he was doing and had proof that it was happening. Well, so one of the things he started doing and healing people is that frequently he would determined that it was some sort of karmic problem or something that was happened because of a past life, which then goes to beg the question that we've all had these multiple lives, or maybe they're all just one life that we're just sort of remembering in different ways.
Sure.
And once again, he's not from a religious background that would in any way indicate this.
Right.
And so sometimes he would indicate that things were about things that had happened in ancient Egypt to a lot of people. There were people that he would say were grouped together. And then Atlantis would come up a lot. And so he would say things happened in
Atlantis and Lemur.
Really?
Yes.
Huh.
And why you would use the word Atlantis is very strange. Because it is a word that completely comes uniquely from European literary history, particularly philosophical history of knowing about.
Yes.
Strictly, it comes from Plato. Plato
which granted
coined
Plato,
that word. And he even said that's not what the people who live there call
No,
it.
right.
Now, of course,
If we could
this
find
is what
original.
it's been known to
now
be called.
Casey is
and I
also
learned this
speaking
from
in
my
English.
teachers in Egypt.
And he's speaking to English listeners, so he's using that word. So maybe he's just trying to be precise. To the English listener,
Using a familiar, but I mean, even Plato said that the story came from his teacher, which came from his teacher, which
From
came from
Egypt.
Alexandria.
from the priests of Egypt.
exactly.
That it came, well, his great grandfather had told him that story, I believe.
So
and his grandfather had heard it from Solon, who was heard it
So
from
you would
the
have to
priest.
take the story when it began at Plato and that void, between.
Yeah, I mean, people talked
a,
about Plato and that there was a place, and obviously people referred to America as Atlantis.
because when he told the
Hundreds
story,
of-
it was like new to their
Because it
ears.
just seemed like, well, that's where it is.
Yeah.
It's out beyond the Straits of Gibraltar. And
There was a loss of history somewhere between when Plato said that story of Atlantis.
but he even said it was 10,000 years before, and that's part of why people think, well, that can't
And
possibly be true.
they had gotten to such a point, technologically, that they all they did was sit around and philosophize. All they did was sit around and create great art, and things like that, because they had become such.
But then they became evil and selfish and warlike. Though.
Exactly.
So he said the gods destroyed them, and whatever the gods are. I mean, basically they could have just been destroyed. But essentially, there's a story about an advanced civilization. Gurdjieff. Do we want to talk about Gurdjieff?
Sure,
y'all
do
know
it.
Anything about Gurdjieff?
Yeah.
Throw it out there a little bit.
He was
Not a
an
whole lot, but a little
Armenian whirling dervish.
Yep.
He was a mystic, is Muslim, essentially. But the whirling dervishes were, the mystic, like Gnostics would be in Christianity, I suppose, perhaps. And he's Armenian, which is a race, which is I'm not going to claim to know a whole lot about Armenians, but they obviously were an oppressed race. He spoke 4 languages: Russian, English, Armenian, and I believe French. And he wrote, Gurdjieff wrote his seminal book is a book called Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandchildren.
Oh my God, what a title.
And essentially, the story is Beelzebub was a higher being. There's all
Yep.
the Earth is populated with a very unique species that are suffering from a problem that is unique in cosmic history, and it's really no fault of the people who live on Earth. This is just a tale that Gertrude told. So once again,
okay.
I'm not saying this is
Right.
what happened. I'm just repeating a story. And so
Interesting.
So Beelzebub, people.
I thought that was a witch.
Well, it's a name of a demonic.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, you're right.
He might be
Demonic.
based on Baal, who
You're
was
right.
a bad idol
Baal was most definitely
Yeah.
one of the
like a
gods that was
demonic, yeah.
sacrificed to.
Interpret his name as Lord of the Flies,
But-
which is what
yeah.
William Golding.
Yeah.
okay.
So the Lord of the Flies
Yeah.
would be. So
Beelzebub was one of the fallen angels.
yeah, well. Perhaps that's an ancient like evil god name that maybe just an opposite of or an opponent of Jehovah, like another witness. Another religion that is opposing Jehovah Witness.
Sure.
Essentially, Beelzebub. That is not his character in Gertrude's story.
Yeah.
He's just this ancient guy that lives forever, kind of like in our concept of like, an alien who would come here and be observing Earth people, and that's all he's doing. And he's going to a council at the center of the universe, and he's traveling with his grandchildren who were born on this trek because it takes a few thousand years to get to the center of the universe to go to this council. So he's just telling them stories about these really weird creatures that live on Earth that nobody else in the universe really understands, and he feels very sorry for them because it's really from no fault of their own, because of something that happened to do with the creation of the moon. The creatures that were intelligent that lived on Earth, there was something horrible that was going to happen on Earth that had to do with the moon, and he doesn't get into what it was. But in order to gird the creatures that were living on Earth, the higher beings put an organ attached to their body that they called a kunda buffer, which is like your kundalini, but it was a buffer on your kundalini. And essentially what that made the creatures, and he always referred to them, to those of us that live here on Earth, is the creature, or I can't remember the exact term, and I don't have it in front of me, and it's been years since I've read it. There's something to the effect of the creatures with three minds. And he always, and one thing about the book is there's very repetitive language.
Huh.
And it's very mathematical, and so when he refers to us, it's all. It would be much more effective if I had the book in front of me and could tell you. But it is something to do with and those creatures with three minds, which is part of what he's trying to explain how this happened. And this kunda buffer basically made the creatures with three minds not aware of what their purpose, basically
really should be. Yeah,
and it was to protect us.
yeah.
Huh.
And then once the whole crisis with the moon was over, that was removed. But there's this process of cycle that we just keep staying in the same thing.
Yeah.
And so why we don't have to have that on us, we still act like we have this kunda buffer on us, which causes us to not know what we exist for. And so then he goes through in a long history of human existence, of real history of civilizations, and of civilizations that we've never even heard of whatsoever, because these are things he knows about and that he's seen, but they're gone. And they just, like in Mongolia, one place he talks about in Mongolia, it's hilarious because he thinks is very bad about them is they had very comfortable toilets. And it reminded me of Idiocracy. Remember in Idiocracy where they're just like sitting on the... He's like, that all they wanted to do is be very comfortable while they were defecating, and that was the downfall. I realized that Beelzebub's character in this story, as far as I can tell after reading the whole thing, the only things he was very fond of in human culture was showering and chewing gum.
Okay.
He thought those were good things. But basically everything else humans did with their time was waste. Fashion, art, they all served a purpose. I had a chakra balancing today.
Yeah, I
at
know.
my
I was going to
Ashiatsu.
ask you about that.
And we were talking
because
about
I'm
pyramids.
sitting here with my crystal in my hand. And,
So, like Gurdjieff
you know,
would say, there was a technology and understanding of what colors and tones, like Beethoven,
like you were saying
and
with the
God's eye,
Ojo de Dios that
that
you're
you could
making.
heal somebody
Yes.
if they had gone crazy and were not functioning correctly. You could take them aside and
Well, and
either
there were-
give them proper sounds or a proper dramatic show.
or a proper amount
To
of
make
light
them-
in a certain color field. There were numerous
Or a
things
story,
in the early
a
1800s.
poem that was told in a certain way
Yeah.
that would fix you.
In a
oh no,
rhythmic- in
these
a
things
rhythmic
Gurdjieff
pattern.
was saying were happening like before Noah's Ark.
Oh, sure.
Like, I mean, when people actually got this.
Yeah.
But then they get so corrupted. And it was really great because he would talk about, like, well, first of all, people would understand that it was sort of dangerous to kind of eat things like a certain sort of fish, kind of thing.
Sure.
And then it got to where, well, you can never do it on this day. And then it was always like, then they'd murder everybody. One thing,
Well, I mean,
one
it
thing you
just
talk
makes
about how
sense if you live
societies
out-
would get smarter.
If you live
and
out
then
in
they
the
would kill
desert
themselves.
amongst the sea and stuff like that, you may not want to just grab some shellfish and eat it.
Right, exactly.
You know,
and so
like,
these were things
there-
that made
there were some
sense.
pork
but then
doesn't
priest
keep,
would
beef
get
does.
them and say, "You will go to eternal damnation if
exactly.
you do this." And so this is
Yeah.
what Beelzebub's laughing at all the humans about.
Well, something's going to happen to you, and you're going to be in a whole lot of pain if you get a hold of some shellfish that ain't right in the middle of the friggin' desert. Or if you get a hold of some pork or a hooved animal.
Where do you get all
ain't
that
right.
stuff in the middle of the
So
desert?
that's where kosher laws came from. I mean, they were literally just common sense laws.
Right.
Like, beef keeps better than pork, so let's eat beef instead of pork.
Oh, yeah.
And
you
so
know?
Beelzebub was saying the same thing about art and everything. It's like,
Yeah.
they all had a purpose,
Mhm.
but then they just became, because these people
Bastardizations of their
keep
purpose.
living under the influence of the Kunda buffer.
Yeah.
They don't,
Not
nobody,
Kunda
like
buffer.
it's just fashion. Like people kill each other over
Yeah.
what they're wearing and stuff.
Yeah, like the old school days of like, I need to shoot you for your Jordan.
He also keeps pointing out that they don't really have to keep dying, that they keep dying over and over and over
Yeah.
again. And he goes, it is so funny because they keep building up their societies and then they'll just shoot it down. They'll just have a big war and kill. He goes, they're just hilarious. Like, I don't get these crazy things.
So that's why we
and he
keep
feels
repeating
really
every
sorry
damn
for
thing.
them all the time.
Yeah.
He's like, I feel really bad for these
Has
creatures.
empathy for
'cause-
these things that just don't understand how reality
And the thing is, they don't get that they can immediately not be in it.
Yes.
Which is the idea of maybe
You can
like
change
of
your reality.
Jesus coming down and telling everybody,
Yeah.
the kingdom of God is here now. Open your eyes now, wake up.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's there, but you're just going to keep walking around and playing your stupid fashion games and worrying about where
Yeah.
people pee and what other people are eating, or what language people are speaking in,
Yeah.
or what clothes they're wearing, or what paint they look on their face. That's the bullshit. That's the illusion that you
Exactly.
people are living in. And if you'll just wake up, God is here right now.
That's
And
it.
that God isn't like this dude or a guy that tells you certain things, that lives in
No.
a church,
And he's not in
that
the
you have to
toga.
pray to. It's something that's manifestly obvious to everybody when we were talking about that Acacia
Yeah,
record.
exactly.
But
Right.
we are under this affliction, and that's why all these movies like The Matrix and things are coming out now.
Right. Exactly.
And stories of Philip
Hollywood,
Dick. That's what Philip Dick was fascinated.
Yeah.
There is literally a book.
There's something going
The
on, but
reality
we don't
in
get
Hollywood.
it.
There is one book that I read on a regular basis. Every couple years, it takes me all of an afternoon to read it because it's only a couple hundred pages long and it's really big type in a very small print or very small book, very large type. And I always keep an extra copy. Like whenever I give one away, I will literally go to Half Price Books and buy another one for like
I'll take one.
$1.50. Sure, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
And that is the book Illusions by
I think I've
Richard
heard
Bach.
of that.
The story of a reluctant Messiah. And it literally starts off with this dude on the side of a river telling a parable. Like we were saying, all these stories, all these things, they're parables. They're parables. They're moral lessons. They're stories that are told with a moral lesson at the end. And he was trying to give this moral lesson to a group about how there's a fish in the river, and the river's going crazy, and the fish can swim all he wants, but he ain't gonna get anywhere. But if the fish just let go, he could go all the way down to the ocean. Like, he could, if he just followed the stream of what was happening, and nobody got it. Like, nobody in the crowd got it. And he was like, you know what? I'm just done with you. I'm just done with you. And he just walks away from his mission and finds this one dude who finally gets it and kind of starts teaching him how to, like, change his reality and how to, like, bust clouds, you know, how to, like, use his imagination to manifest things in the world around him. Which, if you get into the teachings of Christ and things like that, it's very much the idea of you are the one that is in direct communication with your God. You are the one that has the power here.
You're making these things happen.
And,
I think Willie Nelson said that if there is sin in the world, it is you that is making it happen.
That's right.
Nice. That's a good statement there.
Now, you had asked me earlier about something about religion relating to a lot of these things.
Sure.
And interestingly enough, we were talking about Edgar Casey, and I'm going to go even another step farther. There's a woman named, this is probably, I mean, it was old school, probably back in the 50s and 60s. There's a woman named Gina Chermanara, I think was how her name was pronounced. And she had written a couple of books about Edgar Casey and some of his philosophies. And one of them basically would how to apply some of Edgar Casey's philosophies and just the theory of reincarnation scientifically to modern existence, and could some of these things actually be true? And one of the premises that she talks about is that she also combines Edgar Casey with a World War I engineer who I've talked to you about, Korzybski.
Yes.
Who came up with the concept of general semantics, which is the idea that our whole reality is based on the words and the language that we use.
Yes.
And that
we create the construct of our reality.
And that Aristotelian European way of thinking about things has caused us to have a bad mathematics. Like, our description of reality is that we use in our daily language does not reflect the way that reality truly is.
Yes.
And that's why our society is insane. And
it's like using 144 for C instead of 132.
Or using ounces for a volume or for decibels.
Yeah.
Or dancing about architecture. I mean, it's that kind of thing where you're like measuring. Basically, his problem is the mathematic of the verb that we have in European languages of to be.
Yes.
That something is that we completely misuse the word is, and a real good example of
what is
it is hot outside.
To go Bill Clinton in it. What is
well, and that's when I heard him say,
what you mean by
when I heard him say, what is the definition of is I go, he did very well at Yale Law School.
Damn right.
Like, they taught him very well in law school. That's not bullshit arguing.
It is not. That's
smartness.
Brilliant.
Because it's like when you say, is this true?
That's like arguing the Aristotelian concept of nothing. There can be no nothing because you're saying no thing, which thereby gives it definition.
Well, then you say certain things of like, these people are that. Well, that's a nonsensical statement, because as soon as you said it, you're designating a class that is a non-defined class.
That's right.
And you're assuming that everything in this non-defined class actually fits a description that you're saying.
Which is not
for
defined.
instance, like Jews are greedy. Well, you've immediately said something that doesn't make any sense because you've described, first of all, there is no individual. I mean, there are many people that may refer
That's
to
right.
themselves in that sense, but there are no. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Is that every individual is unique.
That's right. You can't define a group by the
like,
acts
what
of an
is a
individual.
black person?
Right,
What is a
exactly.
black
You
person?
cannot define a
Tell
group
me
by
what
the
a
acts
black
of an
person
individual.
is. Black people can't do it. White people can't do it. You can't say what it is, but we
Each
know
one's
it
different
exists.
because they're individual.
And then it's like the whole gender description. Yeah, well, what is a male or female? Well, you can kind of say you know what that is, but what is it? I mean, essentially you're trying to say things are things when that's not even. It's like saying a bushel of TV or something.
Yeah.
Where
I have a bushel
you're
of
trying to
TV.
use a verb
Generalizing
of
too
to
much?
be that doesn't exist well.
Yes.
So we were talking about this ancient European, North American civilization that doesn't exist anymore, but that there's certainly a history of. The Hopi have a very
Ooh, the
extant history that
Very
the rest of us don't
distinct
know.
history.
One of the
Distinct
things
history.
that I hear, I don't know because I'm not an expert in it, that is unique about the Hopi language that they used as the code breakers is
Right.
that it is perhaps the best language to express Einstein's theory of relativity in it, because the only tenses they don't have all of these tenses.
that was the
they have
Navajo
tenses
that
of
they used for the code.
exist. Well, I'm talking about even Hopi,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is
No, the Hopi language was absolutely.
that basically
Yeah.
there is or in
Interesting.
some sort of process of being.
Yeah.
And it's just
There is
if you
now
think
and
about
not
it,
now.
it's so many easy ways that we use the word something is something that doesn't make any sense.
That's right.
For instance, it is hot outside. That makes no sense.
Yeah.
That what you're describing is,
Yeah.
I mean, there's a you
I feel hot
personally
right
as
now.
an entity have a feeling in relation to
Yeah.
how you felt a little earlier or how you might
Yeah.
feel in a few days because
feels-
of the atmospheric pressure and the relationship we have to the sun at this time of year. It's a very much more complex statement than, because what is it?
Yeah.
What is it?
That's it.
What is it
Exactly.
that's it? When you say
The-
it, what is the thing that is hot?
You're right.
Well,
It-
it's
Tell me
the
what
fir-
is hot.
It is the
It
first
doesn't
word,
exist.
It's
so
the fact
kind
that
of-
it is
it's undefined.
It's
right?
the fact that it is quantifiable to the
It
individual.
is the subject of that sentence, and
Yeah.
it
But
is
we
a
don't know what it
non-existent.
is. Yeah.
Well, it doesn't exist. There's
Yeah,
nothing that
it's
is
like,
it.
what is it?
There is nothing that's
Exactly.
I think I might get it now.
because
Yeah.
hot is really only a relational term.
That's right.
And that's once again the theory.
Yeah.
It's only a relational
That's
term.
the
What
only
is
way to
hot?
say it properly is I am hot right now.
Hot outside.
Or
It feels hot to me
there are
outside.
more proper ways of saying that, even than
Yeah.
I am hot right
Yeah.
now. But
Hot outside.
I am hot right now is better than it is hot outside.
That's right.
I'd say hot outside.
And that's one of the things Korzybski talked about. He
Yeah.
supposedly was the guy that invented air quotes, just so you can be aware that this is something that I'm saying. Like I'm saying it.
It's not defined. It's
But-
a word that's just like very vague.
So
Yeah.
you saw the painting that Julie bought from me.
Yes.
That was
Not a
that was a
pipe.
good one. That was a nice one.
and
Not a
that's
pipe.
essentially what we're
She
talking
beat
about.
me to it. She
And
beat
it's
me to it.
essentially what we're talking about.
I wanted it.
That piece of canvas with ink on it or paint on it, you could not smoke anything out of it. That is not a pipe.
That's right.
Isn't it? Yeah. I like
It's
that.
not. Even though it is a physical
And
representation
it's an
of a pipe.
abstraction of it. It makes you think
That's
of a
right.
pipe, which
That's
a
right.
word. The word when I say the word pipe, it makes you think of the word pipe,
That's right.
or however you say it in French,
It gives you an
or however you
image
say
in
it
your
in
head.
Atlantean.
It gives you an image in your head, whatever you think of it.
And you surely don't want to say it, describing it as it reminds me of a.
And that's the magic of it. It's like the flag means this.
Right.
It doesn't mean fucking anything.
It means something
Means nothing.
different to every individual.
Right, just like God does.
That's right.
And the word is
It
does.
is an abstract concept.
abstract is a whole key word because
Yeah.
that you sense things and you're perceiving things and they are not the way reality is.
Exactly.
You're not seeing, everybody even just sees color different.
Right,
Some
right.
people don't see at all.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Some people don't even have eyeballs.
Yeah.
Some animals see at night way better than we do. Bats see things three-dimensionally because they go
With their radar.
and they barely can see anything at all with their
Sound
eyeballs.
acoustic.
Whales can find their way all over the ocean using their sound and things like
Yeah.
that. They see things. Dogs see things that existed weeks ago that we don't even know happened, and
Yeah.
they know that it
I
happened.
was just watching a thing
So
today
basically
where
your
literally they
perception
can use dogs to
tells you-
sense.
Really?
They can literally use dogs to sense whose urine has cancer.
No, I believe that. I've seen dogs like
Straight up.
tell the owner
Straight up.
that they have had cancer before they had cancer.
Yeah.
Yep, definitely.
Yeah.
Or before they knew they had.
And that was wild, dude.
So what I'm saying is perception. There are many forms of perception,
That's it.
and what you're perceiving is the energy and the reality. There's
Yes.
waves that are coming at you and bouncing off either your eyeballs in a way that you can perceive them as light, or bouncing off of your same waves, different lengths hitting your ears and
Yep.
different lengths.
Exactly.
If we didn't have either or,
there
would
are
it still work?
certainly ways to perceive
Same source, different waves.
Okay, so now there are also different levels of perceiving things. You know, like when we think that Da Vinci came up with all these things, and some of those things you think, well, how did somebody else not come up with that? Well, first of all, there's certain levels of. Let's go back to the Gina Terminata and Korzybski and Casey story that I was talking about.
Yeah.
Well, so. She points out, okay, well, there are obviously different levels of humans that can understand different things. And there are obviously different levels of life that understand certain things.
Yeah.
There's absolutely no reason in the world to think that human beings are the top level. So there certainly could be intelligent energies higher than that, first of all. Because we know we're higher than ants, and there's no rational reason to consider scientifically
highest.
that there aren't things like angels and gods and things like
Beyond
that.
us.
Now it's a matter of perception of how you perceive them. People claim to perceive these things. We don't on a daily basis perceive these things. You can't prove
Angels,
them.
aliens,
But we can believe that there's some sort of effect, maybe. And this is not an argument for angels or things. It's just the argument that they could conceivably exist.
Right.
Now, one thing we
How you
know
perceive.
is that there are human beings that exist with different level of comprehension.
Right,
There have
it's true.
certainly been different human beings that exist throughout history who are way, way more advanced than everybody around them, who get that perception and can see more of all of that than anybody else around them.
People like
Right.
Alan Turing.
Maybe they
people
can
like Albert
express it through
Einstein,
music,
people
or
like
maybe they can
Galileo.
express it through science. Maybe they can express it through that, or maybe they're Confucius or Buddha or Jesus or somebody.
Right.
Now, then we get into the fact that let's consider there's somebody like Jesus who obviously there was some major energy that emanated from that part of the world at that part of the time, because everybody on the planet is still affected by whatever fucking happened with Jesus.
Yeah.
I mean, it's unarguable there's not
Amen
a
to
human
that.
being on earth
Yeah.
that isn't being affected by whatever it was that happened at that time.
Whatever
Exactly.
resonant moment.
And apparently there was some dude that
There's very little
Hold
dispute
on.
for the fact that Jesus himself
Existed.
Wait, except for there's nothing written at the time that he was existed that he was alive.
Well,
All of the stories about him were written at least 100, more than 100.
No,
the first
there are
Roman to write about him was in 97. It's 97.
Yeah,
After he was dead.
But Josephus,
Right.
Josephus wrote about
was
him.
not during his life. It
That's
was
true.
100 years.
I guess that's true,
It was.
yeah.
It was after at least 50 years after Jesus
Yeah.
was dead. So it was a story,
Yeah.
like about Woody Guthrie
Right.
or Jack Kerouac.
Yeah.
I mean, it was
Yeah.
that recent a story. But it was a story even when Josephus was telling it. And he
Yeah.
was just talking about people that weren't his people.
Right.
Yeah.
He was saying these Jews have a story.
Yeah,
And they
there's this
mentioned a
thing-
guy.
There's this thing that happened.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the earliest thing. And that's not even during his lifetime.
Yeah.
But we certainly know something happened because a lot of shit happened, obviously.
Yeah.
And it changed the whole planet Earth,
Yeah.
regardless
Let's find
of
all
what
those
happened.
scrolls, you know.
Well, despite any link to divinity, despite
So essentially, we can assume that there was probably
some.
somebody there that turned everybody on
Yeah.
somehow, I guess is what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
Like Buddha or Confucius or Muhammad
Yeah.
or anybody like that. Well, so they've got it on more than anybody else. They've got God more than anybody else. Here's the whole idea. So here's the problem. You have a communication problem immediately because the only reason why you get this better than anybody else in 1,000 years have ever got what's going on with peace, love, and understanding in the world, and why the rest of the world doesn't get it is walking around in this crazy Gurdjieff kind of dream world. They get it. But they're the guy that gets it, and nobody else has fucking got it in 1,000 years. So that's the problem, is everybody you're talking to, first of all, is dumber than you. And so you've got to figure out, how am I going to explain this
How
stuff?
am I going to break this down?
That's, first of all,
How am I
the
gonna
problem.
break this down?
And you got to figure out a story. And then immediately, there are all these different things that happen. There's the telephone game. That
Yep.
immediately starts happening.
Yeah, immediately.
There is the blessed is the cheesemakers kind of thing, which is like, well, or there's like, well,
follow the gourd.
or there's, he said this,
Follow the
this,
sandal.
this, and this, but surely he didn't mean this, because we definitely don't like the gays. So he couldn't have said gays are okay, so let's X that part out. I mean, or
King James version.
there's all these basic, essential Korzybski general semantic things where words get confused, or you gotta eat fish on Friday.
Yeah.
Well, nobody. What?
Take a bath a
Why?
certain way.
Like, it made sense at one point, kind of way down the telephone line. But by the time it got to where I'm having to like live my life like this, you're going to cut my hand off if I eat chicken fried steak on Friday.
Fish on Friday never came from the Bible. That never happened from there. That was a tradition that came.
The Bible is real.
After.
You're giving special significance to one particular writing
I'm with
too.
you. Well, no, one conglomerate.
Somebody
of,
of that
writings.
It's just because but what you're calling the Bible is a thing that has existed. But also tell me go out right now in Austin, Texas, and buy me 100 Bibles, and we'll look at them, and none of them, not one of them, is going to say the same fucking thing.
Right.
Right now in this city, they don't have the same words in them. So
I can give you two,
and
that
that's
do.
just right now.
I can give you two that do, and that would be the New American Bible and the New Jerusalem Bible, and that's because they actually take their
They
text.
have to be together.
They take their text entirely from the original text. They
That's
don't
totally
take their
equivalent.
text
You're
from
just
their.
saying two things that are exactly the same or exactly the
don't.
same.
Well, no,
I mean, that's
it's
just
the
like,
fact that they don't take their
I've seen Bibles
text
like that
from
where, like,
translation of translation. They take the original. They take the original Old Testament from the Hebrew. They take the original
which
New
Hebrew
Testament.
and who translated it?
Well,
true. Lots
from
of
the same
translation.
Hebrew that's used in temple.
Who translated it? And I guarantee you that 1 year, 10 years from now, from then, there'll be a different translator who'll translate a different word in a different
The
way.
New American and New Jerusalem Bibles have not changed for
This
a
is
long
totally quibbling, and
It is,
they existed for less than 100 years. So it doesn't make any
absolutely
difference.
no.
And also, what you're saying is, by definition, they're the same because they are the same.
It's because they use the same source. They don't use it like Latin translation.
Which source is that? When you say an original version of the New Testament, which are those? Because you can't tell me what those are.
Well,
there are no original versions of the New Testament books.
Well,
there are what individual
know.
churches call the original version.
Well,
but even in the Catholic Church, there's dispute over what are the original version of any book, and we don't have.
Well,
them.
no, we came to that decision a long time ago, and that was actually like
No one
the
has a
Council
book.
of Nicaea.
Yeah, but no one has a
like
copy
that.
of even a piece of paper from the Council of Nicaea. All we know about is what's written about it. It is absolutely true. It is absolutely true. All we have is that it is written about it.
Well, yeah, I guess that's true. Yeah.
So we know what
That
was
is-
there because other people wrote about what was there. But as far as pieces of paper that were written down by people that were there, you cannot go and show me where that is.
Yes.
So it boils down to the
I bet
original.
you could not even show me an original King James Bible.
It boils down to
I
the
bet you
original.
can. I bet you can.
The original translator.
But
of
the
original
fact is,
paper.
There was one mistake, one
what we
typo,
know,
one
what we
monk
know-
writing a wrong word down. That was
Absolutely.
the exact opposite meaning of the whole
Right, yeah,
thing.
like-
creating like a whole new devil or a god just
and-
by misspelling something.
And that's
I feel you on that. I feel
Hebrew
you.
has no punctuation in it. So if you're saying
True.
they did take for
There are also
Hebrew,
there are also no vowels. So
Interesting.
yeah.
So
But-
even if you tell me that there were some real live original sources that you could say are the original sources, which do not exist, they don't.
Yeah.
Even if you could say they did, everybody would translate them in a slightly different way. Just for instance, how do you translate that vowel? I think that's an A vowel and not an E vowel. Well, the entire communities in Europe were slaughtered over literally diction. Is Christ God or is Christ as God? There were literally hundreds of years where people would fight battles with other cities because their bishop said Christ was as God instead of God, and it was really just, it's diction. It's like the way you wrote it down on a piece of paper.
Well, and that was the fight against Arianism,
Takes one
stuff like
person
that
to-
was before.
Right, and that's real.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, and a lot of that was actually a lot more of.
So none of what we have in Christianity has anything to do with what the guy Jesus said 2,000 years ago is what I'm saying. Is it? It's,
Yeah,
because it's been a way long,
very
complex
little,
game,
very little of
telephone.
what.
Yeah,
very
the
little,
telephone thing. Yeah, totally.
Well,
like,
no, it's
disintegrating.
been a very long game of adultery of the
'Cause
word
we had
that's
kings
there.
and queens and empires.
and it's the fact of, if you go back and look, it's
Translators.
very interesting as someone who is Catholic, that we use so much the letters of Paul, that we use so much of that,
And so
without
much of what's in
looking
Catholicism is
at
Hindu.
the big red words.
Red shoes, the big red shoes that the Hindus wore.
The big
Cross
red
keys.
words,
Brahmin
the
minor.
words that Jesus actually said.
Yeah.
You know, which, as
they're
you
red
said,
words.
come
Then
from
we know it.
Vedic Hindu tradition, come from the concepts of the Gospel of Thomas, where at the age of 12 or 13, Christ suddenly disappeared. Hey, last time we saw him, he was at the temple and he was 8 years old, and he had the ears of.
And he seemed like a Jew. He became Buddhist, basically.
He had the ears.
He may not have been a
There are
good
very
Christian,
few people.
but he was a good
there
Buddhist.
are very few people at the age of Jesus who would have had the ears of the high priests bent at the temple, listening to teaching, and that's just the only way that would have happened is if somebody was a very young prodigy and would have been like schooled in the ways of like Kabbalah, stuff like that, the very high priest traditions, the very deep spiritual traditions, which was rare to find somebody at that age. Most of the time you weren't encouraged to study Kabbalah until you were like our age, like 30s, 40s, you know. But occasionally there was somebody that showed such potential that they were taught these concepts of Kabbalah, these concepts of the high priest. And that's really one of the only reasons why, if you read the couple of accounts in the Bible where Christ is at the temple and he's like 9, 10 years old,
Right.
gets lost, and his parents is like, "Where have you been?" He's like, "I've been at the temple, like at my father's house. What are you talking about? Where else would I be? Why would you look for me anywhere else?" Like, the high priests were sitting there listening to him. So he had something going on for
of
the high
course.
priests to be stopped and listening to him.
Right.
And that's where the whole Gospel of Thomas comes in, is that shortly after that is where he spent time in India and furthered his knowledge in this, furthered his concept, and came back, because we literally lose track of Jesus in the Bible from the age of 12 to the age of 30.
Right. No, for real, yeah.
We lose track
Because
of
he went
him.
to India.
We lose track of him for like 18 years.
Belief or whatever.
He comes back and gets baptized, and 3 years later he's dead.
You know what gets me?
Well, also, when you talk about the beginning stories, there's 3 different stories in the Bible.
Exactly.
And that's the other. So I was saying, I was challenging you to find 100 Bibles in Austin, and that they would all say different things.
Right.
If you just find one single Bible that exists in the world and look at the 4 Gospels, all 4 of them say different things.
They do because
geez.
they're all teaching to different audiences also. So you have to consider, and that's some of the concept is the fact that number one, none of them were written by the actual apostles, much like things were attributed to the teachers in ancient philosophy, stuff like that, where, Epictetus didn't actually write this. He didn't come up with this concept.
Right.
It was his teacher's concept.
Andy Warhol.
He attributes this to his teacher. So a lot of these Gospels were written 50, 60 years after the fact. The apostles were expecting the fact that the parousia, the second coming, would happen within their lifetime. And when they were 50, 60 years old, they were like, hey, man, somebody needs to write this down. And unfortunately, at that point, it came to the point of they were teaching to different audiences. So while one of them is in Epidaurus, and maybe the people don't wear sandals in Epidaurus. So when Jesus says, come follow me, but only bring the shirt on your back and your walking stick, don't worry about your sandals. Like, they don't know what sandals are. They don't use sandals. While Paul is over here talking, John's over here talking about, like, bring your sandals and your walking stick, but don't worry about the shirt on your back, because God will provide that. Because these people are like shepherds, and hey, they got sandals and walking sticks.
Right. That makes sense to you. And that's the other thing. How do you tell the story to somebody so that they get it?
Exactly.
Okay, so there is this. Let me tell you this story.
So there's that adapting of the story for the culture that you are teaching to.
Yeah.
And that's what happened absolutely over 50, 60 years. Yeah. Most definitely. And the only thing that they could do was gather these stories amongst what had happened and compare and contrast and go, okay, amongst all the communities of Christianity, these are the common ones that everybody seems to follow.
This is what I can't understand, though.
That's how the Bible came to be.
If we all can at least agree that this dude existed or something hey, he was.
There's good evidence that he did.
Right. But what I'm saying is, yeah.
Well,
but I
don't know that there is good evidence that he did, other than the fact that people we're talking about.
That he's not of this earth. He's not of this earth.
But, there are other fictional things that we can talk about. I'm not saying he didn't exist, but there isn't very good physical.
This dude's an alien.
There isn't really any contemporary evidence that he did exist. And that's... But other than the fact that we are obviously affected.
I'm saying he's a higher life form.
Yeah.
But that's a different kind of force. And so you don't even... We're back to that Akashic record kind of thing. Yeah. There is something that's Jesus. What is this show? Oh, God. There's some show I was watching on Netflix or something where... Oh, no, I guess it was the adaptation of American Gods, I guess.
Oh, okay.
The Neil Gaiman book that was on...
Yeah, good stuff. Showtime, I believe, produced that.
They go to Easter's house.
Yeah.
And, of course, Easter was this ancient fertility goddess.
Yeah.
And in the movie, they have her portray. It's Christian Chenoweth, I think, is Easter. And, and the thing is, these gods are only existing in what people remember them and acknowledge them, because that's where their power is. And so every year she has this Easter party in which she invites all the Jesuses to. And there's just thousands and thousands of Jesuses, because everybody's got a different Jesus. It's like, there's... Yeah. And so it's like,
everybody's got a different concept of the resurrection story and what it means. And
so those are all real things that have kind of been given the same concept, and some things were attributed to different people. But we see it happen in our lifetime. I've lived in Northern California, and I will tell you, living amongst deadheads, and I'm not going to, don't get me wrong, I love the Grateful Dead. love hippies,
Chris loves
but
them.
deadheads are worse than Baptists. They're so people, and I understand
hardcore,
why
bro.
Jerry Garcia was in a freaking coma for 10 years because
Damn.
he was like, people who are following me,
Just leave me
you
alone.
do
Leave me
not
alone.
get anything I'm saying.
Yeah.
This is what Jesus was
I was
going through
gonna
too.
say, that's what I
I'm
was gonna
saying
say.
all this stuff, and
Yeah.
you are getting nothing of
Nothing.
what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you imagine that?
Don't quit
That's-
saying that Jerry said. Quit saying Jerry said.
That's
Quit
probably
saying
what
that.
Jesus said.
I would
That's what
never
Jesus
say
said.
that.
Yeah.
Jerry would never say Jerry
And
said.
like I said,
That's
like
probably
I
what
said,
Jesus said.
go read
Quit
Illusions.
listening to me.
Go read Illusions by Richard Bach. It's the same guy that wrote Jonathan Livingston,
That's awesome.
Jonathan Livingston Seagull,
I love it.
stuff like that. But go read Illusions by Richard Bach, the story of a reluctant Messiah, and that's exactly what it talks about. Is somebody who gets it and is
Yeah.
trying to explain it to society,
And
and they just don't get it.
Well, that's
they
another-
just don't
But
grasp
it turns into something else.
You know,
We were talking
and-
about my unwritten novels, and that was the one I was working on when I ended up writing the nonfiction book that I wrote that got published, was basically that story about somebody who was in a particular moment in time in history where nobody understood what was going on, but because of where that person was in relation to everybody else,
Yeah.
everybody blamed or gave the credit for what happened to
Yeah.
that person.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's essentially a moment in which all of history, like, nobody gets what's going on. I called it, like, truly, like, it was one of those things I had in a dream, and I woke up and essentially said something to the fact of that if all people at one moment, I said, at the eschaton, all humanity will speak in unison and say one thing, and that will be, I told you so. Everybody will say that. Everybody at one time will say, I was right.
And we'll
that,
be right.
think about if everybody in the world said the same word at one time. And
Yeah.
I think that if they did, the only thing that they would all agree on is that everybody at the same time would say, I told you so.
Yeah.
I think that's the only thing that all people would agree on.
Well,
And so in this novel, there's like this event that happens, and everybody describes it differently.
Yeah.
Do you remember in the X-Files where there was the guy that saw the alien? You know, like the whole idea of aliens is I do believe that something is happening. No, I know something is happening in nature, the way to human beings that many people are perceiving as alien abduction or all these things.
Sure.
Right.
I don't think that the way anybody
Wow.
is describing it is correct.
Right.
I don't
Yeah.
Right.
like angels but I do think there's something there, and it's just because we don't have an ability to conceive of what is actually happening.
Well, and we can get into that in another
You're right.
episode.
You're right.
Because quite honestly, like, if you look at the biological features of aliens as they're described and things like that, they are exactly as humans would be
if we lived in space.
if we lived in space for prolonged periods. So we're going to talk about
They're
that on
smart
another
androids.
episode
That's true.
of The Lighter Side with Dudes and Beer. On that
We
note,
are gonna get
we're
into
going to
some
wrap it for
Visit
this.
us online.
So, you know, it's quite literally.
find our episodes.
Yeah.
That was a good one.
On that note, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in.
Prematurely closing this out.
Yeah. You know, keep on tuning in. Download the app. It's free. Check us out on the HC Universal Network, family of podcasts. Until next time, everybody, remember, if you can't be good, be good at it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Dudes and Beer Podcast. To listen to our audio streams and chat with us live, download the official Dudes and Beer app for both Android and iDevices, available on the Google Play and iTunes markets. For more episodes, content, and information, visit us online at dudesandbeer.com. You can also find our episodes on Spreaker, SoundCloud, YouTube, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast service. Thanks for listening, everybody, and until next time, drink responsibly.